Shadi came to my ears and said, GGZ am bleeding like crazy, shouting like guts. That's 'cause I just got stabbed by my best friend. Yeah, I know, cliché. But this Griffith lookalike BH played it perfect. Before everything went down, I was just a random-ass Ligma, delivering packages and throwing hands. Then the Grape Gang came and humanity went to sleep. To help us, the big GS gave everyone authority powers. Those with luck became the heroes and grabbed the bag. But I was just a random nah until I saw that snow bunny. He was shining and calling for me. Sejun Lee is the name, and he's selected as the world's strongest player. He looked cool as truck, not gonna lie bro was farming aura like a true G. And now we were about to reach the final boss. At that moment I thought, damn, this nah is about to save us all for real. And me, a random-ass warrior, was selected to help him. We formed our gang and fought the hordes. Zoom in on this cute blondie, please, but live's not that good. We were in front of the last door when my snow bunny backstabbed me. The reason? Same as in the street dog, greed for that power. If heroes kept existing, he would hold his position as the beacon of hope. But even worse, I discovered that all the GS we lost in the war were intentionally removed. I want to kill these Bess. But they just walked away while I slowly died behind like I was inside the storm in Fortnite. But that's when I saw the light at the end of the tunnel. Literally, boom, I jolted away, confused as hell. No blood on my belly and a bunch of ugly-ass dudes around. Suddenly, brakes were hit and Boomer went wide-eyed when he saw the Green Gang going rampage. He calls for his goon squad, but the orcs are coming full throttle and they already want to dip. But then, boom, Tenda. Korean Guts is standing on business and starts eliminating the orcs. 30, a dodge and a headshot midair. This dude is farming Twitch clips at this point. And now that the orcs saw that bro is literally smuffing in this lobby, they try to flee. But another bullet reaches its purpose. Boomer Gang has their hands on their heads, confused and shocked. That whitest young dude just took the whole squad? While bro's tripping, feeling like this dream is too vivid, one of the geriatric soldiers comes to scold him about risking everyone's life. But he gets fully ignored, like my mom when she used to tell me to make my bed. He sits, remembering the snow bunny and thick lips, Lee Si-jin, and Park Sin-yi, the bastards that betrayed him. And amidst this rage, suddenly he hears a ping. You are a player, the Oriole is supporting you. Today's was the day he awakened in the past too. But now he has the option of the Dark World Surrogate. Curses, undead, and the omnipotence power. In his past life, a dude named Johann Jork chose this class and reached the top. While Blondie was the hero, this guy was the evil. And our MC knows if he's gonna hunt that bastard, he has to become a monster too. So, Dark World, here we go. Guilds are groups formed by players with shared interests. And among them, a guild called Phoenix climbed to second place in Korea using unfair methods. Because of that, the noble ideals of the Messiah Guild shone even brighter. Moments later, the scene cuts to the Phoenix Guild building. With the paper on the table, the man says those are the guild's terms. In addition, they'll also give a bonus whenever a dungeon is cleared. Gene thinks he won't be able to buy an item with that amount, but he doesn't have a choice. He asks how he can prove his qualifications as a player, since it's not possible for one player to see another's stats. Then the man places something on the table, saying those are the exclusive skills of the agent of the Shadow Realm, asking Gene to choose one of the papers and tear it. Because if he really is a player, he'll be able to confirm it with his own eyes. Our hero begins analyzing the papers, seeing that one of them is related to a skill called Poison Blood. He's also surprised because he didn't expect to get something like that. Swapping a mage's blood for poison is a difficult skill to manage. But when combined with a blood golem skill, it greatly increases its effectiveness. The boy then chooses the paper, then he tears it. At that moment, a glow starts to surround his body. The scene cuts to another location, where a group is asking why Gene was chosen as a hunting dog, since they thought his nimbus wasn't exactly fit for that. A man whispers in the girl's ear, saying that in the guild, his temperament is just like a dog's, stating that she'll understand if she stays near him because he really feels like an animal. At that same moment, our hero says they're getting close. Taking his battle stance, he orders everyone in the array to fight. After that, Jean thinks that this is not a dream, mentioning that since he went back in time, those other people are probably still alive. The scene cuts to a parking lot, where a man asks if everyone showed up early. The girl says it's her first hunt and asks if they can really trust him. Saib says it's his 4th time in the dungeon, so they can trust in all they want. Even so, he wants to know when the last member will show up. At that moment, a group hears a noise and a beetle car shows up at that place. The other guy says it's that person's first time and that they definitely took a while. Then a hooded boy steps out of the car. The other girl says he should be thankful they let him into the group. The hooded boy starts approaching them. The other guy says not to worry about someone like him and they should just go already. Heading toward the mission, Saib says they should ignore that guy and pretend he's not there. Meanwhile, the hooded guy keeps observing the group. The scene cuts to a man explaining the mission, saying they should just focus on the objective. And if there's any problem or if someone wants to give up, they should speak up now. Otherwise, they should take a look at their inventories too. Then all the players begin checking their inventories. The hooded boy thinks that it's just a bunch of people he doesn't know. It's revealed that he was Jean, thinking there's really no reason to worry. So they should just go into the dungeon already. The girl impressed says it's the first time she's seen a dungeon up close. Right after that, Jean removes his hood and starts entering that dungeon. Inside the dungeon, the other girl is amazed, because that world is completely different. The archer is surprised as it feels like Earth turned into a game. But Saib says that this is reality. Even so, they have to stay alert because they only have one life. Meanwhile, Jean is analyzing the monsters' tracks around them, saying there are definitely a lot of goblins. After that, Saib walks up to Jean, asking if his name is Jean, and asking him to provide escort while they build their base. Having no other choice, our hero agrees. As Jean walks off, the other guy says he thought Jean would refuse, but in the end, it was easy. Even so, he's an idiot because he doesn't realize how dangerous that is. Saib, on the other hand, tells them to hurry up and get ready to hunt. The scene returns to Jean wondering if they're using him as bait. But it's no surprise because he had already predicted it. Moments later, the scene shifts to the Messiah Guild. A woman says that everyone is already there, so she's going to introduce a new member who will be leading that mission. One of the men is surprised that there's a new member. At that moment, someone opens the door. The guy, recognizing the person, thinks that Edieb is pretty arrogant. The man still hasn't shown his face and says it's a pleasure to meet them, mentioning that his name is Suzuki, saying that since there are a lot of familiar faces there, he figured he didn't need to introduce himself. Then another boy says the guy has guts, saying it's a pleasure to meet him, and that his name is Jung Lee. The other guy asks what he should do. Right away, the other guy slams his hand on the table, saying not to talk to his master like that, asking why they brought an idiot like that here. Suzuki asks why the guy is so mad and if he was offended by what happened last time, because it seems like he's holding onto a lot of resentment. Hearing that, the guy gets pissed and says hell kill him one day. Then the leader tells everyone to stop. After that, the guy sits down at the table thinking that soon hell crush that guy's arrogance. The girl says to wrap up the introductions, and that she's going to talk about what was presented earlier, asking how many days they have to wait. Suzuki says that to find the material's location, it'll take a total 3 days. And the blonde-haired boy says that's not so bad. Moments later, the scene cuts to a forest. Meanwhile, our Jean keeps analyzing the claw marks on the trees, thinking that all the rumors he heard about that dungeon were true. Jean smiles, thinking it's almost comical because everything he knows about dungeon exploration he learned from that person. A flashback plays in his mind with a man saying that any trail could hold info that helps you survive in a dungeon. Hearing the explanation, Jean asks that just getting strong isn't enough, but the man says that no matter how strong someone is, they'll always be doomed to have a weakness. That person's name was Suzuki, and Jean thought that his words were a lesson meant for him. But in truth, they were meant for the Messiah. Besides that, he wasn't just a cruel assassin to the Messiah, he was also a loyal little dog to the guild. But he was going to turn those lessons into a double-edged sword and use them to kill him. At that moment, someone fires a stone. But Jean narrowly dodges the attack. It's revealed that goblins were at that location. Wasting no time, Jean opens his inventory and pulls out one of his daggers. Right after, the boy cuts his own hand, saying that for someone like him, who had just been entering and exiting the 7th floor of the dungeon all the time, goblins are just easy targets. Then the group of goblins charges at Jean. But the boy easily slashes one of the creatures, and the system notifies that the goblin moved and was affected by his skill. The goblin once again tries to launch another attack. Jean thinks that since the goblin moved after being hit by the skill, it doesn't seem very effective. At that moment, another monster leaps toward Jean, trying to hit him again. The boy grabs his knife again and throws it into the goblin's head. And the monster, seeing its companion on the ground, panics. Jean thinks the goblin's patterns are easy to predict and that it won't be hard to wipe them all out, but if he takes too long, more of those monsters will just keep showing up. So the boy pulls out another item from his inventory, which appears to be a whip. The goblins, seeing that item, start to get scared, and Jean says it was good he came prepared for this. Then the scene goes back to Jean's group, and some noises seem to be coming from the forest. One of the girls notices this, and at that moment several goblins show up, charging toward the mage who apparently got hit. But in reality, it was Sue who had saved the girl, asking what they were doing and saying they shouldn't be scared of those goblins. The group then feels relieved that they got out of that situation. Saub thinks it was a good idea to bring a longsword because it was going to slice through those goblins like meat, but at that exact moment, the guy seems surprised by something. The sword just got stuck in the ground, and the goblins, taking advantage of the opportunity, land an attack on the guy, who gets thrown to the ground, leaving his 3 companions behind. The guy, desperate, asks his group for help, saying they can't just stand there. Even so, the 3 of them seem too panicked to do anything. But one of the players hadn't given up yet and went after those goblins. The scene shifts back to Jean, who was defeating some monsters. With a threatening look, he starts watching them. Then some of the goblins start running away in fear. Wasting no time, Jean uses his whip, grabbing one of the monsters, starting to choke it, which is then easily finished off. The system notifies that he leveled up again, and also that the agent of the Shadow Realm had taken interest in him, so he received another achievement. Jean says the requirements are lower than he expected, because he's getting notice for something so basic. And only idiots go around swinging heavy swords. Just a whip is already more than enough against goblins. Moments later, the scene cuts to Sue, who had still survived. His companion asks what happened to the newbie who was escorting them. Sia, without mercy, says he's probably dead by now. The other guy says it would have been way better if they had one more person, and that following him ended up being a bad decision. At that moment, the group starts hearing more noises from the forest. The scene returns to Jean, who kept leveling up. The system appears again, saying that the agent of the Shadow Realm was impressed with his abilities, and he received a new achievement called Skeleton Soldier. Without wasting time, Jean opens his catalog and pulls out that skill. Surprised, he asks himself if he really got that skill already. He mentions that a man named George was the king of the dead and could control an entire army, but failed at a critical moment, which allowed Jean to capture him. Also, the fact that only monsters killed by the summoner could be used as sacrifices was a total weakness. Right after, Jean tears the paper, saying that this will speed up his process. Moments later, the boy was already walking toward the goblins, using some kind of skill on them which immediately reduced them to just bones. Jean watches silently. Then, surprisingly, the creature stands up and Jean says he liked that monster's eyes. Time passes again, and that creature keeps defeating the goblins. Jean, watching the creature, thinks it's a bit below his expectations, assuming it was because his mana is low and that it's kind of weak to use as his main attack. Either way, he wants to find out about something. Looking at a tree, he wonders if those are the remains of the players. From goblins to dragons, the only thing they have in common is that they exist to hurt people, so there shouldn't be any pity at all for monsters either. The scene returns to Siob's group once again. Their captain was frustrated that they still lost to goblins. The other man asks Siob what they're going to do, because he thinks they let their guard down. Frustrated, Siob says he can't die like this, especially not to mere goblins, and he will never die this way. The group stays silent, listening to what Siab is saying. He asks what's gotten into them, mentioning that they've taken enough damage, but even so they can still pull through. The other man, desperate, says that's not it. Siab asks what's going on. Right after, the archer tells him to look up. At that moment, a level up symbol appears. The man, confused, says he hadn't even fought, wondering what was going on. Besides that, there's only one way to level up while standing still, which means someone else is fighting in his place. The scene returns to Jean, who apparently is inside a cave. He says that based on his experience, that method of killing goblins is different because none of them compare to this. Right after, the boy throws a torch on the ground. At that moment, an explosion occurs, burning the entire cave from the inside. The scene cuts to those goblins who were inside the cave, realizing that smoke was coming from there. At that moment, they begin to choke, and the monsters start collapsing unconscious. Even so, they try to resist, but it still wouldn't be enough because Jean was waiting outside. Then the monsters seem to be trying to break through the barricade. Jean watches what's happening, surprised. At that moment, several goblins show up, desperately trying to escape the cave, but still can't. With a smile on his face, Jean says he might as well hold a funeral for the players since he's already here, leaving those goblins inside the cave. Time passes, and the system notifies that the agent of the Shadow Realm is pleased with his cruelty. But Jean keeps watching something. He says it's strange because he thought that after doing all this, he'd at least be able to see that person's face. Thinking that it's getting annoying, he wonders if maybe they're hiding somewhere. At that moment, something starts to move in the rubble of the cave. The other monster had already noticed it. Then something seems to take shape, and a goblin was apparently still alive even after all that fire. Jean says it's a relief because he was getting tired of staying in that place. Even so, the monster came by itself because it was the champion of all the goblins. Before the Messiah Guild could intervene, many newbies died in the dungeon. All because of that monster. Thinking that running into a goblin champion in a starter dungeon would mean certain death, but from now on, no one else will die. Meanwhile, the skeleton keeps watching Jean. Right after, it starts walking. Jean sees that monster and wonders if it was waiting for an opportunity. The monster, it determined, watches Jean once more, waiting for a signal from the boy, who keeps observing his monster, saying its expression had changed. Moments later, Jean apparently gives the creature a chance. The goblin champion starts watching his opponent, and at that moment charges toward him, going between his legs. The skeleton then lands an attack. Jean, observing the creature's skills, is surprised. A flashback pops into his head, showing his companions fighting a monster. The other guy asks how they're supposed to capture something like that. Jean, appearing on the scene, says they just need to aim for the legs, then destroy its balance because that increases their chances of winning. Jean, determined, watches his target, landing an attack on the monster's legs. Still, it's not enough, and he's repeating the same attack multiple times. Back in the present, Jean had already recognized that technique. The skeleton, meanwhile, keeps fighting the goblin champion, charging once more and ending up behind him. Jean, surprised, realizes he recognizes that fighting style, because it's exactly the same as his own. He mentions that he knew a skeleton soldier's strength would be affected by his mana stat, but he was shocked to see it could copy his fighting style. Before going back in time, he had used every type of weapon imaginable, and not even in the Messiah Guild was there someone who could beat him in a Unknown. If that were the case, he would have to change his plans. At that moment, the boy receives another notification from the system. Wasting no time, he opens his status window. The system announces that the agent of the Shadow Realm congratulates him on his achievement, and has sent a page of a legendary skill. At that moment, Jean smiles because he wasn't expecting to get that. Time passes again, and the scene shifts to a soldier saying that the dungeon has been cleared. A man, surprised, asks if that's true. Then he opens a door and is shocked by what he sees, because all the adventurers have returned alive. Thinking that if all the players made it back, it means the dungeon really had been cleared. Wondering if that's actually possible in just one day. At that moment, medics appear to assist the wounded players. The other guy asks why there are only 4 people and questions where Jean is. Seob hears it, but stays silent with his group. Some guy assumes that Jean must have already been killed. But at that moment, one of the soldiers says someone is coming out. Right after, Jean steps out of the portal, which disappears instantly. Our hero starts walking out of the place, but the other guy tells him to wait. Meanwhile, Seob is shocked, wondering how someone could clear an entire dungeon alone, because that was definitely impossible, asking himself who that boy really is. Time passes, and a woman comments that the greed of players around the world is growing over time. But the Messiah Guild cleared a 5-floor dungeon without asking for anything. In another report, a man concludes that the hero Leon once again saved the world. After clearing the 5-floor dungeon, their sponsors and the team saw a huge increase in market value. Meanwhile, Seob is watching all the news, saying that the media only talks about those people. It makes it look like they only care about money. But his friend tells him to stop watching that stuff, wondering what really happened in that dungeon. But Seob asks him not to talk about it because thanks to one rookie they almost got killed. And that injury of his happened because of that rookie. The man, surprised, asks if the rumors are true. Seob says that rookie joined them wanting the items, so he rushed straight into the goblin horde. To save the kid, he had to go after him too, and that's how it happened. The guy, really frustrated, says they should ask the guild to punish that person. But Seob tells him to forget it, saying it feels like he stepped into a pile of crap. The team returns to Jean, analyzing some information, saying that unlike before, this time you shouldn't get close to Lee. And before showing any interest in him, he must become stronger. To reach him, he would have to start connecting the clues from where it all began. The scene cuts to a building with a man talking about the Orc Hunter dungeon. Jean says he doesn't know any rumor and just needs his money. Right after, the other guy questions if that's really true, mentioning that life is precious and shouldn't he be worried about his own as well. And if it's an emergency, the guild can lend him some support. But Jean refuses, saying he'll handle it one day because he's going to finish the rest. Moments later, Jean had already left the place, and the old man asks what the status is of the dungeon Jean was trying to enter. The guy says that Yang's team went in, but even so, they were wiped out. And because of that, no one had requested that dungeon for over a month. The old man asks who this young guy is, and the other man says he was the ace of the Park Youngman division, concluding that Jean was trying to enter a dungeon that almost no one could handle, and that rookie is definitely going to have a short life. Even so, since he doesn't want to listen, they should at least support him somehow. The scene returns to Jean talking about killing those heroes. That's why hell even make friends with a demon if needed. Time passes again, and the scene goes to another place. A man is approaching Jean, asking if he's that Jean guy, and if he really plans to go into a dungeon alone. Our hero stays silent, and the guy assumes that his greedy personality didn't help him find companions. Even so, the guy tells him to enter the dungeon immediately. Surprised, he wonders if he really intends to go alone. Right after, the two were already approaching the dungeon. Jean was observing his stats, thinking that based on his level, clearing that dungeon is impossible, at least if he were alone. But if he can use the orcs as skeleton soldiers, then it's a whole different story. At that moment, one of the orcs charges at Jean, who dodges the attack, sliding under the monster's leg and landing a strike on the creature. Watching the situation, Lee thinks it's just a normal orc, but its endurance is way better. And if he got hit by the monster, he'd probably die in one blow. But if he kills just this one and summons it as a skeleton soldier, his chances of clearing the dungeon go way up. At that moment, the orc charges at Jean again, who manages to dodge the attacks, rushing once again behind the monster, landing several strikes on the scratch he had made on its leg. Even so wasn't enough to bring the creature down. Our hero pulls back once more, and the orc was apparently starting to take damage. Jean says that now it's a predator that can't walk, concluding that it would be his prey. Finally managing to defeat the creature, the scene shifts again with two people facing each other. One man, analyzing a paper, says this is interesting. The other guy asks what he's been looking at all morning, and if he's going to say he's after some weird item for his business again. But the man just gives a smile, handing over the paper. He tells him to take a look for himself. Seeing some information about Jean, he's surprised because it's a rookie who awakened not long ago and even so managed to clear a dungeon alone. The guy says it looks like he just entered his second dungeon and went in alone on top of that, but his friend doesn't believe it, saying that even he had a hard time in the beginning and asked if he's seriously believing in those reports without a reliable source. Questioning what he's doing to be so willing to believe all this, then a girl shows up, asking if there's a problem with her report. The man, realizing she's the one who wrote the report, is surprised, saying he was just saying how it was way too perfect and asking where she found such detailed info, but the girl says that's just her job. Se-chan says the information is 100% trustworthy since it was gathered by Secretary Lee, and if they don't trust his secretary, there wouldn't be anyone else who could do it. But at that moment, Se-chan says he can't trust her because she told him not to buy instant coffee since she hates it, questioning why the girl brought it up. Then Lee opens her eyes again, saying she bought the coffee at the place where they had a meeting with the Phoenix Guild and that the report was printed on recycled paper. Right after, the guy changes his expression, saying the coffee is actually really good, affirming that if they don't trust his secretary, there won't be anyone else who can do the same job. Hearing all this, his friend thinks he's acting like that because of his age. Time passes again, with Se-chan asking his secretary how it was going with the dungeon purchases. She says there were some good dungeons, but they were very expensive and she's still working hard on it. His partner asks Se-chan if there were any dungeons they had saved, but the guy asks what he's talking about and if he hasn't cleared all of them already, but the boy says he just got out of a dungeon yesterday and should at least be allowed to rest a bit. Teasing him, Se-chan says he works so much that if he suddenly rests, he'll start getting sick. Moments later, the scene cuts to an orc defeating the skeleton in front of it. Jean says they don't last long since the skill level is still low. Even so, there was something good about it because he learned something from the bee fought in his past life. Then our hero casts an enchantment and the system says the skeleton soldier has been summoned. That giant orc starts turning to bone, becoming one more pawn for Jean. He says that as long as he has mana, his skeleton soldiers will be immortal, and besides that, he had killed a lot of monsters in that place. The orcs that were still alive were panicking as they watched what was happening. Time passes once again and Jean was still leveling up rapidly. Looking at his stats, he says he thought trying to level up in that dungeon wouldn't be very useful and thinks it's better to stop fighting regular orcs and go after the orc hunter. Drawing the map, the boy says the monster that kills its own kind is probably the leader, but it seems like it doesn't get along well in a group. Then one of the skeleton soldiers appears and Jean asks what the problem is and if by chance, he knows something. Jean is still looking at the map, thinking that there's a place with no monsters to use as sacrifices and he'll have only one skeleton soldier, which would be exactly the one standing in front of him as he starts walking. Our hero says he really needs a plan. Sometime later, the scene cuts to an orc who, meanwhile, is dragging one of his own kind, apparently already defeated. Then that orc sits in a corner, seemingly eating his companions. Jean watches the monster from afar, thinking that a boss has much greater physical strength than normal monsters and it'd be idiotic to fight him without a plan, but things would change if he could hit that monster with a poison-filled arrow. Then Jean signals to his monster, who immediately reveals itself to the creature. Looking to the side, the orc spots the skeleton, charging toward it determined. The skeleton also rushes at the creature. Their attacks collide, but it's the orc who manages to win, biting a part of the skeleton. Jean thinks the orc's crimson eyes are proof that it's the orc hunter, and to bypass its tough skin, he has to aim at its one weak spot. Then he fires his arrow, hitting the monster straight in the head. But even then, it hadn't given up. Pulling out the arrow that it hit, the system announces that the orc has been affected by poison blood. Jean thinks the weaker the region hit, the faster the poison spreads. Then the orc already starts showing signs of the poison's effect. And the system announces that due to the poison's effect, the orc's HP will be continuously drained. The orc starts staggering and Jean says poison blood is deadly at level 2. But at least it's enough to weaken him. Then the skeleton rushes the monster. But Jean says the battle is already over and the victory finally goes to his team. A system window appears stating that he has defeated the orc hunter and has leveled up. Looking around, Jean says that monster ate everything it saw, wondering if that guy from Park Yinwan's group is still around here. Our hero notices something in the rubble, because one of the skeletons is completely different. Thinking that slash definitely wasn't made by the orc, it looks like it was attacked from behind and seems like something done by someone used to killing people. If it was an intentional murder, he's not sure. But if they're part of Park Yinwan's group from the Phoenix Guild, it wouldn't be absurd. Regaining his focus, Jean thinks there's not much time left in this dungeon. Wondering how he'll find out what race that person belonged to, and it'd be great if there was something he could use to get close to Park Yinwan. Then Jean starts noticing a light coming from a cave, and he's surprised because he didn't know one of those was there entering it. The boy thinks the entrance is wide enough for one person to fit. Then the boy comes across a skeleton. Looking at the sword, he says it's surprisingly clean, and even so the body isn't damaged like the others. Which means that while his comrades were being devoured, he ran away and counted his days until he died still, a fitting attitude for the Phoenix Guild, especially for the star member of Park Yinwan's group, because there's no place more fitting for that kind of person. Then something falls from the skeleton's body. Jean, analyzing the book, wonders what it is, realizing it's a kind of diary, but even so there didn't seem to be anything important in it. However, Jean is shocked by what he sees, because he finds a blacklist from Park Yinwan's group. Satisfied, Jean says this is an incredible stroke of luck, and he's going to make good use of it. Once again, a system screen appears for Jean, informing him that he received a legendary skill page as a reward, and its name was Eye of Anubis. Looking at the stats, Jean says it lets him see the memories of the dead. Then he tears the page, saying it seems like the luck he didn't have in his past life has finally helped him out. And the system announces that he has learned the skill Eye of Anubis, receiving the title Legendary Hair approaching the skeleton. Jean says that people say in the dead don't speak. But even so, this monster is going to end up singing when he uses that skill on it. Wasting no time, our hero activates the skill he just gained. And a kind of dark aura starts to surround that place, beginning to move toward the skeleton. A light starts to swirl throughout the entire cave, and the other skeletal monster was just watching. Several memories start to flash through Jean's mind, with that guy saying he can't die there. Mentioning that killing humans is a crime, but it was fine because he had someone covering for him. The other guy, confused, asks who that person is. And the man says it's the one who will become the owner of the Phoenix Guild, whose name is Park Yun-hwan. After that, those memories start heading into Jean's mind, which he can't handle, overwhelmed by all that information. Still confused, Jean assumes those are his memories. Stating that seeing the past of a dead man isn't exactly pleasant. Even so, he finishes his preparations and thinks that if he uses the information he got from that guy's memories along with the list, he might be able to pull something off. Moments later, the scene cuts to a house. Meanwhile, a man stands there with his fist bleeding, asking if he really let another player clear the dungeon. The other guy apologizes, saying he'll get rid of that specific person. But the leader says the dungeon he couldn't do anything in was cleared by a rookie who was alone, and asks how he plans to handle that. The other woman apologizes as well, saying she'll take immediate action. Right after that, the guards begin to drag away the guy who's begging not to be killed. The leader says the rookie solo cleared a dungeon and seemed pretty competent. Even so, nothing about it was impressive, and he asks if the guy doesn't have a bad reputation within the guild. His secretary says yes because he abandoned his group in the first dungeon, and there are rumors he took all the rewards for himself. But Park says the problem is the reputation because it would be way harder to grow if he can't do everything on his own. Then someone calls the guy's phone, saying that someone named Jean asked to meet him. And upon hearing that, the leader says he walked right into the lion's den by himself. Time skips again, and the man says that 20 slots were designated for their guild in the rank of dungeon auction, mentioning that 3 groups, including Park Yun-gaiwan's, are competing for the 20 slots. But the biggest issue is that even if they split into 6 slots each, there would still be a fight over the remaining 2. The old man says there are 3 groups, but only 2 slots left, and the secretary confirms it's true, because no consensus has been reached yet. Mentioning that since it's a rank of dungeon, there's a chance of a rare item appearing, and besides that, the dungeon only has 1 floor. The old man says they're not going to back down because everyone wants this too much, and asks if they realize the kinds of things that can happen inside dungeons still. He thinks all of this is a pain in the ass, asking if there's anyone not affiliated with those groups who could take the last slots. The secretary says no. The old man says that's understandable since you never know what'll happen when you join a group. Right at that moment, the guy says that Yang Wan is calling. The old man answers the call. Surprised, he asks why Yang Wan is saying that out of nowhere. Watching this situation unfold, He says he understands, and that he'll call back another time. The secretary asks what happened, and the old man says that Jean was asking to be placed in the remaining slots without the other groups knowing. Since they're already talking about Jean, his reputation is already bad because he's the type to walk alone, and the groups don't really care about him. The secretary asks if he's that Jean joined Park's group, and the old man says he doesn't know since it's possible he's just being used as someone to be thrown away later. The secretary asks what's going to happen to the remaining slot, and the old man says Park Yanggae-won said he'd be willing to give it up to the other groups if they let Jean into theirs, mentioning that he's an incredible strategist, because he never imagined Park would play a card like this behind everyone's back, thinking that maybe he's pretending to give up now just to gain something next time. Then the scene shifts back to the secretary asking why Yanggae-won accepted Jean's offer. He replies that it was fun watching him come all the way there, bringing that with him, and also that there's no one useful in that place anyway. Mentioning that Jean is someone he can manipulate however he wants and discard when he's no longer useful. A flashback from an hour ago plays with Yanggae-won asking if he knew what that was in his hands. Jean replies that yes, he knows because he ended up looking, and Yanggae-won asks if he came there to blackmail him for money, because that definitely won't affect him. But Jean says he came with an offer, not blackmail, because he wants to participate in the one-floor dungeon they've been having trouble with these past few days. Hearing that, Yanggae-won is surprised and suddenly bursts into laughter, asking if he knows what kind of dungeon that is to be saying all this. Our hero replies that he's fully aware because it's a dungeon being contested by guilds like Messiah and Phoenix due to the limited number of spots. Yanggae-won asks if even knowing that he still wants to walk into a battlefield, which is why he's definitely crazy. Even so, he'll accept the offer, but with one condition. Moments later, the scene cuts to Jongbu University. Jean, from a distance, is observing a lecture which says that they probably already know just by looking, but that dungeon contains at least 10,000 orcs. Jean keeps watching the explanation silently, thinking that, in his past life, the number of survivors from that group had been very few. Around at least 70 people, only elite players from the top guilds went in, and considering that, it's impossible that almost half the deaths were caused just by fighting the monsters. Assuming they had no choice but to turn a blind eye to what happened due to the lack of evidence. Concluding that there's a high chance the players started killing each other, since it would have been a good opportunity to eliminate rivals and steal items. Besides, in that dungeon, the reward for killing the orc champion was the orc fong, which was awarded to the Messiah Guild for their major contribution at that time. Jean didn't know anything, but now thinking about it, it all seems extremely suspicious. Moments later, our hero had already stopped watching the lecture, thinking that even if was behind that incident, there's a good chance the Messiah Guild didn't directly participate. Instead, they planted spies in the other guilds, and if he uses his memories to predict the next move, something might happen. Moments later, the scene shifts to the whole group entering the portal. The Messiah Guild is introduced. Next to them is the Phoenix Guild as well. Not just them. Other guilds are there too. Jean alone watches all those guilds, thinking that the first thing he needs to get is the orc fong, which in reality should be in Lee's possession, and so all the groups enter the dungeon portal. A surprised girl asks where her guild is, and the guy says it's going to be hard to find them with so many people. Starting to search for the Messiah Guild, he orders everyone to gather there, right after a group of people begins walking toward a certain spot. The guy is surprised and says that the Messiah Guild is already in an incredible formation. But the other soldier says it won't change anything if they go in first because there are at least 1,000 orcs in that place. Moments later, one of the groups had already encountered a monster. The other guy says that they from the Messiah Guild will take care of. Then he faces the creature, which in turn begins charging at him, but the guy manages to block it with his shield, withstanding the creature's attacks. Right after, the monster looks surprised, and the guy asks if that's all it's got. His partner begins chanting an enchantment, binding the orc with those vines, which apparently were working. Right after, a scream echoes through the forest. The startled soldier wonders if it might have been an earthquake, but the other guy says that's not it. He insists that something's out there in the forest. The group, panicking, begins to hear even more of those noises. Even so, they remain silent, and at that exact moment, several orcs come bursting out from that place, charging straight at the players, and a massive battle breaks out right there, with many players getting taken down. Not just that, orcs were killed too. Some of the mages were chanting spells to assist the players. The soldiers rushing into the fight say they arrived just in time, so they need to finish this quickly. Our hero was watching the whole situation from above, thinking that it happened just as he predicted, and no one would notice if he disappeared, so now is the time to get the item he's after. Jin thinks he's sure that the small orc group won't kill all those players. His goal this time is to kill the champion and all 1,000 orcs, and the groups will try to reduce the orc numbers beforehand to minimize their own casualties after the 1,000 orcs are killed. They'll start searching for the champion. And in the meantime, he has to get the Fong of the orc champion. The scene shifts to another place. An orc is sitting on his throne. His subordinate defeats the other companion. The monster starts staring at the other dead orc on the ground. At that exact moment, the axe-wielding orc stands up and lets out a roar from afar. Our hero watches, thinking it was a good thing he chased after the orc who ran from the fight, assuming that one is the champion, because he seems way stronger than expected. Besides, he sent his subordinates into battle and luck is on Jin's side because of that. Concluding that while the others are fighting on the front lines, the champion will be completely alone. Because of that, Jin will have to seize this opportunity. A flashback pops into his head, with Jin saying that orcs aren't a big deal, so they should keep pushing forward. Thinking that there aren't as many orcs as he expected, and the main group is probably somewhere else. Right after, another person shows up and says a massive group of orcs is heading in their direction with around 900-1000 orcs. It looks like their army. Jin says they should get out of there for now because they need better gear to face an entire army. Right after, another guy appears saying they're not Messiah's little dogs, so the Lion Guild will advance alone. Saying a huge orc group is coming this way, and even though the competition between guilds is important, they won't cooperate with each other. Hearing this, Jin says everyone is going to die in that dungeon. The other guy asks if he's not confident or something, because if he's scared, he shouldn't have even entered the dungeon. So the group begins to leave that place. Jin says they should head somewhere safe and rest to prepare for the next battle. Then the scene cuts back to the present, and 2 skeletons are standing before the orc champion. Right after, the monster rises, and the protagonist is standing beside the 2 skeletons, who then begin to run. Wasting no time, the orc activates his artifact and strikes one of the skeletons. Watching this, Jin thinks this is impossible. The orc charges once again toward the remaining skeleton, who barely dodges the attack, but the orc was expecting that, trying to hit the skeleton with another kick. Jin thinks his skeletons aren't holding up as well as he expected, and while holding his arrow, he thinks he's only got 1 shot. All this while the last skeleton soldier is distracting the monster. In the next scene, our hero has already fired the arrow, but the orc manages to dodge it. The protagonist is shocked, wondering how he dodged it. The skeleton rushes at the orc again, continuing to attack the creature, landing several blows on the monster's legs, but unfortunately, its sword breaks. And the orc, taking advantage in the situation, strikes the skeleton, which is shattered in a matter of seconds. Jin says this is pissing him off, and drawing his weapon, he figures he'll have to change his plan, thinking that it's impossible to fight a monster like this just for the orc champion's Fong, and it'd be better to retreat since his mana is nearly drained. Right after, Jin starts running away. Even so, he's surprised, wondering why the orc isn't chasing him. Realizing the monster seems to be looking off to the side, assuming it's too much of a hassle to chase down an enemy who's fleeing, which is expected from a rank dungeon boss. But when he comes back, hell makes sure the orc regrets letting Jin escape while our hero flees. A few people are hidden in the forest. The man, surprised, wonders if someone besides the Lion Guild also ran away from the battle. But his companion says maybe that person found the orc champion before they did. The guy says he's not sure if he's coming back because he found the champion or not, and they can't trust anyone until they see it with their own eyes, because the drop item has to go to their guild no matter what. Right after, the man looks to the side and sees all of his companions lying on the ground. Shocked, he wonders what just happened, thinking no one mentioned there was another monster besides the orcs around. But looking at the situation, he figures this probably isn't a monster, asking who the hell is there and if they really think they can walk away after doing all that. After that, all we hear are screams. The scene returns to Jin and the other guild groups, thinking it's great because none of the groups showed interest in him. Even so, if he wants to know the reason behind that mood, it feels like they're at a funeral. And looking to the side, he sees several people who had been killed. However, something's off, because even though only players entered and everyone came well prepared, he assumes the war between the guilds has already started. Then the black-haired guy says they went too far using their skills, and another man says they're just like them. The man says that's a lie, mentioning that the Reiti Guild is as pumped up as always. Asking if there's any news about the other guilds, the guy says it looks like the Lion Guild was the one that took the most damage, and a group went into the forest to collect items, but all of them disappeared. His companion asks if it was just 2 people, and the guy says maybe because the bodies were so mutilated that no one could recognize them, since orcs eat humans. Meanwhile, Jin was just listening to all the discussions. The guy says it's still weird because it's unsettling. If it were a normal case, it would just be a few injured people. Jin thinks that's something that can happen since they're in a rancid dungeon, but the chances of so many groups being wiped out in a single day aren't that high. There's definitely someone behind this, and his plan will fail if the players get too weak. Time passes again, and the scene cuts to a group of orcs, apparently heading somewhere. One of the soldiers starts panicking, saying this is overkill, because those monsters just won't stop coming. One of the monsters lets out a roar. An explosion happens right after. The scene goes back to Jin, thinking the war had already started. Even though the problem is on this side, he won't be able to seriously injure the champion with the gear he has right now. And if he uses the skeleton soldiers as bait, it won't work because their durability is extremely low. But thinking it through, he assumes the skeleton soldiers can at least use bows and arrows. Moments later, our hero is already standing in front of the orc champion again. Thinking the monster seems to have been holding back that day too. Even so, they should begin round 2, and without wasting time, a monster uses its skill. Its artifact immediately begins to glow. An explosion follows right after. In a matter of seconds, the orc leaps toward Jin. Our hero tries to land a hit, but the orc narrowly blocks it. Noticing from a distance a group of skeletons with bows and arrows using his axe, the monster hurls some stones, but it was obvious the skeletons wouldn't just stand there. And while running, they begin to fire more arrows. The orc easily deflects all of them. Jin thinks the skeleton soldiers do know how to use bows and arrows, just like he predicted. That way, everything will go according to plan. The boy charges at the orc, striking the creature. Then the monster's necklace rips, dropping the artifact that was on it. Without wasting time, our hero picks it up, and the system announces that he has obtained the orc champion's Fong. As a result, the monster's buffs start to decrease. Irritated, a monster tries to attack Jin, who manages to dodge his blows from afar. Those skeletons keep landing arrows, so the orc ends up poisoned by all of them. Jin thinks that now that he has the artifact, his attacks are finally working. That Fong is amazing because it's legendary ranked, and the only requirement was to be over level 1 using the relic. Jin says there's only one thing left to do now, which is to wield a weapon capable of defeating that orc. Meanwhile, that was trying to eliminate Jin's skeletons. The monsters kept firing their arrows. The orc blocks some of them. Even so, the arrows pierce through his defense because he no longer has his artifact. At the same moment, our hero appears behind the monster, who notices the boy trying to strike at him, but Jin dodges, using his sword to attack him. The system announces that the champion has been poisoned by venomous blood. The orc drops his weapon. Jin begins analyzing the axe the champion was using, and it was now aimed at one of the skeletons, who immediately grabs the weapon. However, the skeleton seems confused. Even so, it drops its bow and arrow, and Jin thinks the right weapon to cut off that damn orc's head is the axe. The scene returns to that guy from earlier. Surprised, he wondered what had just happened because that wasn't the screen of a normal orc. Assuming someone nearby might be fighting the orc champion. Wanting to know who that person is because he needs to report it to the guild as soon as he understands what's going on. Then the guy jumps, pushing off the mountain ledge. Looking down, he's surprised because there were 2 summoned skeleton soldiers along the player. Also, he couldn't sense the presence of any other players. Assuming that idiot is facing an orc champion king alone, wasting no time, he thinks he has to report this to the guild immediately. From afar, Jin was watching that guy. The scene returns to the same idiot, who immediately takes a hit. Looking at his shoulder, he realizes it's an arrow. Right after, he falls to the ground. Looking around, he wonders what just happened, asking who attacked him, assuming he had been spotted by that person, but surprisingly, it wasn't Jin. It was someone else. An unknown man appears, but the blonde-haired guy, recognizing him, thinks he's from the Skull Guild. Even so, it's already too late because the guy ends up being defeated, and the man from Skull Guild finishes off his enemy without mercy. Jotting down some notes in his notebook, the guy says there are only 5 people left, asking what's so great about fighting like idiots against orcs when it's way better to kill players during that period. Right after, his companion says that half the items belong to the guild and they need to be split. The boy says he already knew that, asking if he really was going to kill that person. The guy up in the trees says that person isn't on the list, but he'll take them out to steal a reward if the chance shows up, because he'll probably be exhausted after fighting the orc champion, and killing him will be like taking candy from a baby. Starting to head off somewhere else, he says hell leave the rest to the guy and tells him to meet up later. Then the man starts dragging the other guy, saying the orcs will do the rest of the job if they throw that body to them. Meanwhile, someone was watching him from a distance. It's revealed that it was Jin who was doing so. The scene cuts to another location with several people killing orcs. Another guy calls out to his leader, saying that if they keep this up, they'll clear the dungeon in no time. His leader agrees, but from now on they'll slow the pace and fall back whenever they get the chance, because they need to prepare for the main event. At the same moment, several system screens pop up for the players. The guy, confused, doesn't know what's going on. A warning screen appears saying they killed the orc champion. All the players are confused, not knowing what just happened. His leader, surprised, thinks that the main groups from all the guilds were busy fighting orcs. His companion asks the leader what's going on and if it means the missing people from Lion Guild are still alive. The guy says he doesn't know anything, thinking that he had assumed the Lion Guild was just bluffing. The scene returns to an orc being defeated. It's revealed to be Jin along with his skeleton. The system announces that he has leveled up and received the Orc Champion Hunter achievement, and a catalog will be given as a reward. Seeing what he got, Jin is surprised, because he received a book that holds the power of Osiris and can store up to 5 dead monsters. Looking at the item, Jin thinks it's like an inventory to store monsters. Additionally, it boosts their abilities, so we should test it right away. Soon after, our hero uses that on his monster, which is immediately absorbed into the book. A massive light begins to shine in the sky, and Jin says this is amazing, thinking he won't have to kill monsters with his own hands anymore and can just summon the skeleton soldiers as soon as he enters a dungeon. With that, the biggest weakness of the ability to summon skeleton soldiers had vanished. Moments later, the scene cuts to the forest. A subordinate asks where the leader is going since the orc champion has already been defeated. The guy, frustrated, asks if he really thought he didn't know that, because he at least needs to see things for himself. To come up with an excuse, asking what he's supposed to tell Yonghwan. When they leave from a distance, the Skull Guild group watches, saying that the orc champion was taken down faster than they had expected. The man says there's going to be a change of plans because they'll leave the guy who killed the orc champion alone and take out the remaining targets. Even so, he wants to know what happened to the rookie who went out to clean things up. His companion says he told him to come meet them as soon as he finished, so they'll have to teach him a lesson after they leave the dungeon. The man says that if their identities are discovered, the higher-ups will have a lot of trouble, and they have to prevent that no matter what. Now they don't have much time, so they need to move as stealthily as possible. At that moment, the guy hears a noise, realizing someone is approaching. Looking ahead, he sees that it's the rookie, asking why he's running toward them making so much noise, but behind him were some skeletons. Surprised, his companion wonders if the rookie actually went up against that person. Meanwhile, the skeletons were charging at the group. The man asks if he's gone insane, questioning what they're supposed to do now that he brought those people there. At that exact moment, their location had been exposed. The leader thinks that the fact that guy attacked them means he knows something, and if the fight drags on, the attention of the other guilds will fall on them. Drawing his sword, he thinks that even if he has to abandon the rest of the mission, he needs to get rid of that guy and erase all traces, ordering all his companions to begin. But in that exact instant, all of them are attacked from behind. Everyone from the Skull Guild drops to the ground. Their leader asks what just happened, and that damn bastard had betrayed them. Surprisingly, Jean removes his cloak and the leader apparently recognizes him. Moments later, Jean thinks it was because of those people that only half of the players made it out alive back then. Even so, he couldn't find any information related to the Messiah Guild and the rookie's memories, thinking that even in the past that guy was listed as missing. With no other choice, Jean figures he'll have to pay a visit to the master of the Skull Guild. But before that, there's something he has to do: settle the score with the orc champion. The scene returns to the present with the Skull Guild leader wondering who that bastard was. Right after, one of the skeletons charges at the players. Jean thinks he's lucky because all the guys from that rookie's memories are right here. Meanwhile, the skeletons were about to attack the players. One of them begs not to be killed, but he's taken down without mercy. The leader thinks that bastard doesn't even hesitate while slaughtering the others, then says he doesn't know who Jean is, but he won't find anything out from him, thinking that even if he walked out alive, he'd only be a burden to his leader. Drawing his sword, he thinks he only has one option left. Right after, he uses his own sword on himself to avoid revealing any information. Jean is surprised by what the guy just did, saying that he ended up doing something pointless. Even so, he figures he should thank him since he just proved there's a lot of info to uncover. Jean uses his Eye of Anubis, revealing some information about his past. A voice says they will cooperate with the Messiah Guild to build a foundation and expand their influence, but the other man disagrees, ordering him to go to Korea, become a member of the Skull Guild, and devote himself to his homeland. Because if they manage to monopolize the dungeons and items from Japan, including everything being produced in Korea, it would be a great benefit. They'd be able to build an empire even stronger than what they had before. It would be called the Yamato Empire, and the Celestials of Japan would be the ones who helped establish it. Recognizing the people, the guy is shocked, saying it's an honor to meet them all. Thinking how surprised he is to be standing in front of the Master of the Bow and the Master of the Sword. The scene cuts to a little later with the guy saying there's someone he has to eliminate once a rank of dungeon shows up, mentioning that a dungeon breaker named Suwon is a good guy who is apparently getting in the way of the Japanese dungeon breakers. His companion, surprised, asks if there are skilled dungeon breakers in Korea too and wants to know the name. The scene shifts back to the present with Jean saying he still had hoped things would be different, but it looks like it's over. Mentioning that even in the worst moments, they trusted one another and fought together. But the Master of the Sword and the Master of the Bow were still capable of doing that. Before returning to the past, he had conquered many dungeons alongside them, always stepping forward to save the world, and he wanted to be like those people. They weren't just his masters, they were also his mental support, his precious companions to whom he had entrusted his life even in brutal battles. At least that's what he thought. Because even those two are no different from Lee. And he can't let things go their way this time, thinking about how they said the next target would be Se-chan. And if he's someone on the blacklist, he's probably very skilled. The fact that he's not in his memories means they managed to kill him in the past. And if the Yamato guys pull that off, Lee will benefit in some way. As long as he remains on the blacklist, there will be constant attempts to kill him like moths to a flame. Jin might end up finding a clue on how to weaken their group, and he also needs a dungeon breaker who can secure some dungeons for him. Moments later, the scene cuts to a guy asking if he's always so quiet around portals. The man says there's no chance of monsters coming out of the portal, so it stays that quiet because once the dungeon reaches that place, it's going to turn into chaos, all because players will be fighting each other for the items. Aside from the Messiah Guild, everyone else will be trying to walk away with at least one extra item, but either way they should worry about that when the time comes. Right after, his companion looks ahead and asks what that is, since the portal apparently opened and out of it comes the protagonist. At the same moment, several doctors and staff appear because the dungeon has finally been cleared. Time passes again, and news about that dungeon spreads across the world. No survivors from the Skull Guild made it out alive. Meanwhile, Yen will listen to the news, asking why it's so damn hard to find the bastard who defeated the champion. The scene cuts to another place with a man asking if he's seriously telling him to believe that. The subordinate apologizes, saying it happened suddenly and promises it won't happen again. Yen asks how they plan to make up for the time and resources he invested, along with the disappointment he's feeling now, mentioning that this isn't a charity where he gives endless chances to worms like them within a week. They're to bring back 5 times the money he put in, and they'll do whatever he says as long as he's still giving them a chance. The group is shocked, asking if they really have to pay back 5 times more. Time passes again with Yen asking if that guy is being treated in the hospital, and his secretary replies yes. Frustrated, Yen says he doesn't have a single useful person. Since the guy got injured in a 1-floor dungeon, the secretary says the wound wasn't caused by a monster, and Yen asks what she means and whether he was attacked by guild members. The secretary says the truth might come out in time, and that it would be better to hear the story directly from him next time. Getting up, Yen says they're going to the hospital, asking if she seriously wasn't going to tell the others like an idiot. Moments later, the scene cuts to the hospital. A man says that if the boy remembers anything, he should get in touch. Answering the call, the guy says it's bad because the boy doesn't remember anything and wonders what he's supposed to tell his bosses, thinking that he wanted to know why Park Yinwoo placed Jean in his group. Right after, Yinwoo arrives at the location, saying that judging by the expression of the guy who just walked out, Jean kept his mouth shut. Moments later, Yinwoo walks into the Skull Guild, but just hearing about them makes him highly suspicious, mentioning that he saw that guild attacking the orc champion. But the fact that all of them died means the items were stolen by another group, stating that the only thing he saw was someone using the chameleon skill from the Silent Hunter class. Yinwoo says he knows that skill and that it's really useful for completely hiding the user, and now it's clear they were planning to kill the orc champion along with the other players. Jean says it's true, and if it weren't for his skill, he would have died, and if the person who attacked him hadn't been affected by the blood he spit probably would have been defeated. Yanhua says he was really lucky, since all the Skull Guild players were killed and there's no one else besides him who witnessed it. Besides, it's incredibly frustrating because he lost so much thanks to that Skull Guild. Thinking that he can't let this slide and needs to gather information on the Skull Guild to reduce his losses right after, the guy says he gets it and asks what the protagonist wants. Confused, Jean asks what he's talking about, and Yanhua questions if he's really going to keep playing innocent, say that he spied on the players because of their deal, but even so, he clearly has another reason behind it with no other choice. The protagonist says he's looking for someone, asking if he knows a dungeon breaker named Sikon because he's pretty famous for being skilled, but Jean can't find him since he doesn't have many contacts. Yanhua, surprised, asks how he knows that person and tells him to answer the phone if he gets a call from an unknown number, mentioning that he's an arrogant guy who picks his own clients, but he's definitely talented. Also says again just to be safe, but he needs to keep quiet about what happened, because it'll be dangerous for him if it gets out. Watching the situation, our hero says he's aware of that. Right after, Yanhua leaves the room. Jean thinks that everything is going according to plan, and even if he doesn't fully trust him, it'll work out. Yanhua doesn't know anything about the relationship between the Messiah Guild and Skull, and once he starts gathering information, Lee's group along with the Swordmaster will shift their attention to him. Besides, Yanhua doesn't even know that Jean injured himself on purpose, so now he'll have to suffer a bit. The scene cuts to a car with a voice saying that even though the Skull Guild is a large group, the fact that they have no sponsor might mean something. Yanhua says they're receiving funds and selling items under the table, that's why they need to investigate black markets outside of Korea to find the merchants making deals with them. Concluding that those merchants are all the same scum, the scene shifts back to the protagonist thinking that call should happen soon. At that moment, his phone rings and Jean, pleased, thinks the timing is perfect. A voice begins speaking on the call, saying he heard the kid wanted to talk to him. Jean says he needs to find more dungeons, and the guy says they can discuss that after Jean shows his skills, and hanging up, he says he'll send the details later. Jean, surprised, thinks it's true that he picks his clients, and even though it's just a rank C dungeon, he's using it as a test. Time passes again. The guy says they got another new applicant client who came through a contact from Park Yanhua. The other guy asks if he doesn't remember what happened last time. He could be someone trying to kill him, but Chan says he doesn't care, and if that guy really were Yanhua's subordinate, Yanhua himself would have said so, mentioning that it's pointless if he doesn't pass the test, and it's fine even if he's someone trying to kill him as long as he's skilled. Because if that really happens, they'll be able to shut down all the dungeons and end this game. That's exactly the kind of guy they need. His friend asks how he can say something like that, because if he were looking for that kind of guy, he's standing right next to him, but Chan says he still has a long way to go and he can't even clear a dungeon on his own. Even so, he sent him to the Kobold dungeon and he'll see what the guy does. His friend asks if he didn't go too far, and Chan responds that it's not like he forced him or anything. Watching the situation, the guy says that Chan really isn't thinking about making deals. Moments later, the scene cuts to a car approaching a dungeon. Wasting no time, Jean gets out of the car, saying it's a Kobold dungeon, wondering if they're seriously trying to make money off of this. They want make it easy by using a dungeon that regular players would struggle with, but this is just to filter out those who can't even defeat kobolds. Meanwhile, someone was watching the protagonist from afar, and the girl says that Jean was already approaching the dungeon, asking if she should start the timer immediately. The guy, surprised, says the protagonist is really fast, asking if he prepared anything. But the girl says it doesn't look like he brought anything special. Watching the situation, her friend says the guy really is crazy. Either crazy or just way too confident. Chan replies that it could be either. The scene jumps to another location with a guy saying that the Messiah Guild doesn't seem like such a big deal, as they know it's hard to predict what can happen inside a dungeon, and because of the risks, it's a shame they didn't get anything. The other man asks if it wasn't a huge mess since 5 of his students die and they still have the nerve to say nothing happened. The guy says he's also aware of his connection to the Skull Guild, asking if that's why he offered the job of handling the rank of dungeon first. Just like he said, there's no way to predict what happens inside a dungeon. But he wanted him to believe that his members were wiped out by mere orcs, and because of that, they couldn't ignore it under any circumstance. Right after, the guy kneels down saying he should have thought twice before saying something inappropriate, and if they could just give him more time, he'd investigate it again. But the man says that's not necessary because they already begun investigating on their own. Even so, he tells him not to be nervous and asks why he doesn't have a drink, and just like things are going now, they still have an alliance with the Messiah Guild still. He wanted to make one thing clear. Because when people get offended, alcohol is a great way to fix things. It makes all the disagreements between companions disappear. That's obviously if they were companions and the guy agrees in saying they're right. Then the two of them leave the room. The man thinks he was careless with the bow master and the sword master, and because of that, he needs to come up with a solution. Immediately get into a car. The other man asks if they managed to take care of the situation and how big their losses were. Hearing the details, the man seems to already understand, saying that the culprit isn't any of the guys on the assassination list, so it's not someone particularly skilled. His current target is the Phoenix Guild, so they're the only ones left. If there wasn't someone among the targets hiding their power on purpose, then the one responsible must be a faction they haven't discovered yet. Moments later, the scene cuts to a building near the Kobold dungeon. The guy in the hoodies is a player entered that dungeon, so they should take a few days off. His friend says he's never seen a player who's all there in the head because that guy is probably going to die soon for going in alone, but at that moment the dungeon opens. The guy in the hoodie says his friend was right, but the other replies that the portal opened again, which means the dungeon had already been cleared. The guy is completely shocked because even with the whole party, they wouldn't have been able to finish the dungeon that fast. Even so, they need to hurry and find the person who cleared it. And looking ahead, he spots the car Jean was in. Time passes again with Chan asking if they lost track of the guy and why they're not doing their job properly if they accepted his money. Meanwhile, the secretary is listening to all his complaints. Right after, she calls out to her boss. Frustrated, he asks what she wants. The girl says she didn't pay those people because they simply didn't go help. Instead, Chan said he'd buy them a round of drinks, but the guy says it's a shame because he decided to stop drinking starting that day. As he starts to leave, the girl tells him not to worry because if Jean is interested in working with them, he'll reach out soon. Chan thinks the girl is pretty cold, but then remembers that it was around that time when he first met her. Right after, that other guy enters the room asking if there's something wrong with the secretary, and Chan tells him to leave her alone. Either way, Jean had already cleared the dungeon in just half a day, so he's worthy of his expectations. Moments later, the scene cuts to the protagonist's car. A flashback appears of him still at the dungeon site. Some kind of radio was on the hood of his car. Jean wonders what that was about. Returning to the present, Jean wonders whether they were trying to negotiate with him or not, and why they wanted to get in touch with him once the dungeon was cleared. After that, the scene shifts to another car, with a guy thinking he can't face the master like that, thinking that he'll have to ask Yang for help. At that exact moment, his phone rings. The guy asks what happened. After listening to the information, he says he'll head to the location. The scene cuts to Yangwan saying it'd be great if he could handle this quietly. The guy asks if he's talked to the person he's supposed to protect, and Yangwan replies that he hasn't yet, but he will soon now that he just spoke with him. The man says he'll explain the situation to his subordinates, and Yangwan says that either way, he should keep the guy alive and help him get out. From a distance, another guy was watching a conversation, wondering what Yangwan was thinking. Soon, another person shows up, saying he's curious about that too, and he says he wanted to know about the Skulls Guild. A flashback pops up in his head with the guy saying it would be a bit difficult to share information about the Skulls Guild, even if it was for Yangwan. Yangwan says he's being more cautious than usual, asking what would happen if he revealed the secret of the Skulls Guild in the Arank dungeon. Surprised, the guy asks if Yangwan really said that, thinking that this isn't something he can solve alone, and that he'll have trouble reporting to the master. Wondering who the person talking to Yangwan is, and the man says his name is Jiang, someone Park does a lot of business with. Not just a mercenary, but also a player who doesn't belong to any guild, and would do anything he's told as long as he gets paid. The blonde guy thanks him for the info, and the other man says he's always indebted to the Messiah anyway. Moments later, that other guy approaches the mercenary asking if they can talk. The mercenary, observing the man, assumes he's from the Messiah Guild. He says he doesn't know what the guy chose from Yangwan, but still has a proposal to make, mentioning it's something related to cooperation with the Messiah Guild. The mercenary asks what he's talking about, and if he can maybe put it in simpler words. Kim replies that he's talking about a business that will bring a lot of profit, asking if he still hasn't understood, because it'll take much longer than expected. The scene shifts to another location. The secretary says she managed to grab a public dungeon just like he asked, but questions if the method isn't different from what he usually does, and whether it wouldn't complicate things further if he intervened. But Yangwan says the Skulls Guild has already drawn some attention. Then, calling someone, he says they need to set the stage for the main character. Right after, the scene cuts to Kim. If you ask what Yongwon might be waiting for, a flashback appears with the mercenary saying that Yongwon asked him to protect someone who apparently must be important back to the present. Kim was checking his phone, thinking that the name is on the participant list of that A-rank dungeon. But there's no way he could face the Skulls Guild veterans on his own. Then the scene cuts to the protagonist's car, asking if he passed the test, and the other guy says yes, since he finished way earlier than expected, asking if he was hiding his real skills. But the boy says he only showed his skills because he asked him to think. Yongwon says he understands and asks if June wants to buy a dungeon, mentioning he added it to the list of the ones they got from the Yishun station locker. Observing the situation, June says he got it, but has a lot to take care of now and will call again in a few days. Staehan says that's great, and that he'll be waiting. Then his companion asks if he's really going to do business with him, because he has a bad feeling about him and says he's a really dangerous guy. Staehan asks when his hunches have ever been right and since when is job brokering a risk-free job. Sometime later, the scene cuts to another place with the protagonist asking if he's saying he should be the bait. Yongwon says that's right, but he didn't know how the rumors they talked about spread, and it's only a matter of time before it reaches the Skulls Guild, asking if he doesn't want to die just from sitting around doing nothing, saying that he recruited skilled guys to protect him, asking why he doesn't trust him and just enter the dungeon with them. June says that even so, his live's on the line and asks if there's a real reason why they have to go through all that. Yongwon says he owes a few favors and isn't the type to leave debts unpaid. Observing the situation, the protagonist says he understands, but still would like him to raise his cut. Both of them at the same time think they fell for the bait. Right after, the secretary shows up saying the boss prepared something for him, handing him some kind of skill page. Time passes again with June thinking that before his return to the past, Yongwon had met the Yamato faction, where he ended up becoming a traitor and a true opportunist in fact. Even so, he's surprised that he received a gift like that, which is being way more useful than he expected. Moments later, the scene shifts to another location with a guy asking why they're being so pathetic because at this rate, they'll end up in debt until they die. The leader tells them to stay quiet and just keep walking because that guy Yongwon went easy on them. Even so, his companion says it was unfair because it wasn't their fault and they didn't even know who had done it. While they were arguing, someone was watching them. Apparently, it was someone from the Skulls Guild. The scene shifts to another place with a man saying that the preparations are ready. Meanwhile, the mercenary is on a call to Park Yongwon, asking if he just needs to deliver Jean to him, and the guy replies that yes, that's exactly it. But the mercenary says he's paying them too little because considering they're losing an important client, he should be compensating with something much better. But Kim says that if it's about money, he can pay more once the job is done, and he can also find another client if that's what he wants. However, the mercenary says he'd rather make a deal with Messiah, and if he can do that, he doesn't think there will be any need for extra payment. Kim says he can't do that because it's a personal request and has nothing to do with the guild. Right after that, the guy drives off in his car. The mercenary says they hit the lottery and that they'll be rich after this is over, mentioning that they're just human and not everyone is the same around there, asking what that has to do with them, since they should just enjoy this chance and get paid afterward. Moments later, the scene cuts to another place with the dungeon being sealed as a result. Only 3 survivors remain from the Skulls Guild. The director, surprised, wonders what happened to the members of the Phoenix Guild, since they were all dead. Even though they were all skilled men from Park Yongwin's faction, the secretary calls the members of the Skulls Guild, asking if they know what happened to the members of their guild and if they can explain it so he can tell their families. Without any mercy, the Skulls Guild guy says he cut them up so badly they weren't even recognizable anymore. And then he leaves the place in his car. Inside the car, his companion asks if he forgot what the master had said. He told them to be careful not to cause trouble. Calling on his phone, he says they finished the job but wants to know why they haven't been given more to do. Kim says he found the target and that he'll enter the dungeon at dawn, so they should head to the designated location right away. The scene changes again, with Yongwin saying there's a foreigner in Korea, and this will be a good opportunity for him as long as he uses the Skulls Guild. He always thought it was a waste to work only in Korea even if things don't go according to plan and Jean ends up dying. At least he'd get information about the Skulls Guild. The scene changes again, with the protagonist approaching a group of people. Calling the protagonist a newbie, another guy asks him to come closer, saying he should give his best to clear this dungeon, mentioning there's one more group that should be arriving, but they seem to be late. At that very moment, a car pulls up. The mercenary says he's already here and the members of the Skulls Guild appear. Our hero seems to observe the people, then asks where the bathroom is, and the mercenary says he was thinking the same thing. Moments later, the mercenary says that Jean is the one they're supposed to escort, and the protagonist asks if he's the one Park had mentioned earlier, but the mercenary changes the subject, saying they should talk about that on the way. The others don't know they're on the same side, so they have to avoid being seen inside the dungeon, saying it's likely that an ambush will happen on the second floor, and if they start killing each other right from the start, the dungeon will be tough to clear. Still, he shouldn't worry because they know what they're doing, and he just needs to trust them and enter the dungeon. Jean will be the first to go in because if they go in together, it'll look suspicious. So the boy starts heading for the location, and the mercenary thinks this will be easier than he expected. Time passes again, and the group finally enters the dungeon. Apparently, they were reorganizing, realizing that the first floor will be for exploration. The mercenary says the objective isn't too hard, so they should split up and walk around alone. Observing, the protagonist says he had gone in alone, so at least one person should accompany him. At that moment, one of the players volunteers to stay with Jean, and the leader agrees, saying there's no time to waste, so they should kill the goblin quickly and move on to the second floor. After that, the group starts to split up. The mercenary keeps watching the protagonist from a distance, who in turn is doing the same. Our hero looks back, thinking that the real fight will begin on the second floor. The scene cuts to another guy asking why he's not going after Jean, and if it wouldn't be annoying if he ended up getting killed. Kim says the people who hired him will escort him properly, so there's no problem. He asks if it won't be even more annoying if the protagonist runs away, and the guy questions what he means by that, and whether he doesn't trust his skills, but Kim says there's no need to get offended by that. The scene shifts to the mercenary asking what Jean is doing, and the guy replies that he's killing orcs and is pretty skilled, using a poison skill to take them down. Analyzing the situation, the mercenary asks if there's anything else because he's bothered by how easy things have been so far since Park and Kim aren't the kind of people who would spend that much money. He asks if Jinwook is following them, and the subordinate confirms, asking if he should go with them. But the mercenary says no because he wouldn't trust him anymore if he was in that place, so they should wait for him to lower his guard. Time passes again, and the mercenaries group is walking. His companion says he was definitely there, wondering if he went somewhere else, and the mercenary says if he did, then he must have left a trail judging by the smell of blood. He's sure someone was really there, asking why Jinwook still hasn't shown up. Observing the corpses of the monsters, he suspects something definitely happened there. Apparently, something is wrong. Right after, one of his subordinates tells the mercenary to look over there, because there were some dead people at that spot. Not only that, the protagonist was also there. Desperate, the mercenary tells him to check on Jinwook first, the rest should set up a perimeter. The subordinate, seeing what had happened, is shocked. Meanwhile, Jinwook is coughing up blood. His companion tries to stop the bleeding, but Jinwook points to the other side. His companion starts looking at the protagonist, who is still lying on the ground, but the guy says that doesn't matter, what matters is that he has to survive. The mercenary, watching from a distance, asks what's going on and wants to know Jinwook's condition. The subordinate replies that he's in critical condition and like that, he's going to end up dead. Frustrated, the mercenary wonders what happened, since there's no way they would have fought each other at that moment. A flashback appears in the mercenary's head from when he was talking with Kim. Assuming that guy might have planned to kill him, his subordinate, asking for help, says that Jinwook is bleeding heavily. At that moment, a skeleton monster appears behind him, landing a strike on the guy who apparently has taken down one of his companions. Yells out for his friend. The mercenary thinks Jinwook was injured like that so they could take out their healer. Observing the situation, he says he thinks Kim deceived them and that he should have noticed it earlier, since that request was already pretty suspicious. Right after, the skeleton army starts cornering the group. The scene changes again, with the Skulls Guild guy saying not to overdo it because he needs to conserve his energy. His friend says those monsters know he's perfect, which is why they keep coming for him. But the guy says that's not the reason, it's probably because he stinks like hell. The man asks how he can say that and whether he knows how much that perfume cost. The guy asks how many times he's told him that a bunch of monsters are sensitive to smells. Right after, more monsters show up, rushing toward the guy who easily grabs one of the creatures, then tears it apart. Even so, the group doesn't give up, charging again toward the man who defeats another one, then begins to observe the other monster beside him again. The scene shifts to another location. The mercenary, apparently wounded, asks how he could betray them. Jean says that for someone who's dying, he's still being dishonest. Even so, he's not surprised anymore to see players who only use their powers for personal gain. But his greed went beyond the limit, asking if he doesn't always say that every person has a different value. A flashback pops up in his mind with a group asking why someone from Messiah was there. The mercenary says he told them to keep Jean alive and that he wanted to ask him a few questions. Pulling up the sleeve of his shirt, the mercenary says he can fill that out next time, because there are still plenty of people left to kill. Surprised, his companion says he's already killed a lot, asking if that mark is from the last time when 3 people begged for their lives, and that it would be great if they got more requests like that, since they made more money killing 3 people than completing a dungeon. The mercenary asks if he thinks all lives have the same value because in truth everything is different, so they just have to kill in a way that matches the value. The scene shifts back to the present with Jim saying that even he is curious about something, all this about how much his life is worth. Right after, he strikes the mercenary who is easily defeated, and after that, the protagonist walks away. The scene changes to another place. Already nighttime. Jim says he was hiding in the same place where he cleared that dungeon in his past life, so now it's time to move on to the next floor, since the skeletons were waiting for him right after he takes down that other goblin. A light begins to cover the forest. Kim thinks his companion was supposed to wait and then send a signal once he found the goblin. The other guy says that judging by the situation, it doesn't look like things are going according to plan, because the first floor was cleared suddenly, and it seems they're moving to the second floor, waiting for them to show up so they can be killed. Besides, way too obvious. And after that, the group moves toward that light. Kim, frustrated, wonders if his real plan has been found out. The scene goes to the protagonist standing in front of a glowing door. He then touches it. The door begins to open. Our hero looks ahead, and apparently the second floor has been unlocked. The scene shifts to another place again. The secretary says that the item that Guy bought is a collection of tubes, which seems a bit strange. She knows that the rest of the monsters are sold for higher prices, but the boy probably won't get any valuable items for resale in that dungeon. Manhwa is surprised, wondering what Kim could be thinking. The scene returns once again to the dungeon with the second floor being open. The other guy says it looks like those guys managed to get to the second floor first, and it's possible it's an ambush. His companion says he's going to have fun hunting someone down, so for that reason, he should thank them. Right after, the group starts entering the dungeon, climbing straight to the second floor. Meanwhile, a monster was sleeping, which then wakes up again. The other guy wonders what that is because he thought it would attack them right away, but something seems off. Looking around, his companion says they're probably hiding in fear, but right after that the guy ends up triggering a trap and arrows suddenly appear. However, they manage to defend themselves. Still, there was something more, and the vials that were on the arrows explode. Looking at the liquid on his arm, the guy wonders what it is, assuming it could be blood. Besides that, he has no idea what's happening, wondering if this might be a great chance to attack them. From afar, the protagonist was watching everything, saying he thought that scent was on the same level as theirs. Annoyed, the guy asks where his companion is and whether he really thinks he'll be safe after betraying them like that. Jim thinks that it's exactly what he expected because that guy really believed he was on Zhang's side. Coming up with an excuse, he says he already knew the guy was planning to kill Zhang and his team afterward, and he doesn't think it's the right time for small talk. Looking down, the other guy wonders what's going on because something is heading toward him. And at that moment, a massive creature appears behind them. The other guy just watches, but then he gets bitten. His companions were just watching, and the monster had already made another guy into a snack. The purple-haired one asks what Jim did. The protagonist says that the liquid that fell on belongs to the goblin, which just so happens to be the favorite snack of the lizard warrior. And since they got a whole lot of that sauce spilled on them, they probably make a great dinner for the creature. Hearing that, the purple-haired one gets furious, saying he'll take Jim down someday. Charging at the protagonist, his companion, watching from afar, asks if he's really going to leave him there. But the guy doesn't have time to think about that, charging once more at the protagonist, saying he's going to finish him off right now. But our hero starts mocking him, saying he only barks and doesn't bite. Looking at something, our hero is surprised because that is his master sword, saying he thought he was just a simple guy when he charged forward, but probably a disciple of the sword master. The other guy, looking around, wonders where Zhang's group is, but he shouldn't be thinking about that since Kim's group is the real problem right now, saying that there shouldn't be any issue completing the dungeon even if it's just the 4 of them. Meanwhile, his companion is trying to stop that lizard, begging his teammate for help, who thinks that if Zhang and his men show up now, their forces are too split, which will likely lead to everyone dying. The scene shifts to the other two fighting again. The purple-haired one asks how Jean knew all that. Our hero says his master must be insane for having trained someone as useless as him, thinking he's glad the guy is falling for his provocations, but he really is skilled. It won't be easy to beat him with just his sword, but he still has a plan up his sleeve. At that moment, the purple-haired guy charges at the protagonist again, who dodges with a leap. Right after, he starts spitting blood straight into the man's face, who immediately backs off, asking how he dared do that, thinking that since he fights using poison, dragging things out will only put him at a disadvantage, so to keep the battle from stretching on, he's gonna end this now. At that moment, he casts an enchantment on his sword. Our hero watches from afar, assuming it's exactly what he thought, an attack exclusive to those chosen by Nimbus, the enforcers of the sacred light. The guy finishes his enchantment, then launches it toward the protagonist. Our hero just watches, and a wave of energy rushes toward him. The other guy thinks his body is starting to feel heavy. Not only that, but he was supposed to capture Jean alive, but surprisingly, our hero appears behind him. The guy can't believe it, wondering how Jean dodged his blade. But it's already too late, because he's taken all of the protagonist's attacks, and is easily defeated by him. A flashback appears in his mind. His past self thinks he can finally use the blade of destruction with his master, but he could only use it once. Watching him, his master says the boy has gotten much better, but it's too early to use that in a real fight, and with his arm in that condition, using the blade even once could be dangerous. That move has immense power, but he needs to avoid using it against enemies who might know of his weakness, and if he ends up facing a monster still unscathed after taking the blade of destruction, he can be sure he'll be captured and then killed. The scene returns to the present, with that guy defeated by the protagonist. His companion watches him from afar, but it's already too late because the guy also got attacked by the creature. Being thrown far away, the other man thinks they've been careful about being disciples of the Swordmaster, but they're all just pathetic. Besides, Zhang still hasn't shown up with his men, so there's no chance of winning now. Starting to talk to the protagonist, the guy asks for a truce, asking if they really need to fight anymore. Otherwise, they won't be able to clear the dungeon. With a little smirk, our hero says he doesn't need to worry about that. At that moment, he summons an aura, saying that killing all of them is going to be much easier. Jen still doesn't know what's going on, asking what Jen means by that. At that moment, a skeleton begins to rise from the ground, and the protagonist's army is assembled, asking how he's supposed to trust someone who tried to kill him multiple times. Meanwhile, the guy just watches. At the same moment, a shadow appears behind him, and it's that same monster from before. The man barely manages to dodge the attack right after. His companion shows up at the scene, saying he's been asking for help for a long time, and he's still just standing there. Right after, a creature begins to strike back, trapping the Skulls Guild guy. Then it starts watching him, saying he thinks he's going to suffocate from the smell of that lizard. Then the monster begins crushing the guy. Kim thinks that if he makes it out alive, there's only one option left. This isn't something he can handle alone. First, he needs to escape that place, hiding until the others manage to finish the dungeon. Starting to run, he thinks he'll have to deal with this later because his priority is to survive. He absolutely cannot die. Right after, something appears behind the man who had already noticed it. At that moment, the protagonist's skeleton charges toward the monster. Kim thinks it's impossible for a soldier like that to move that way. It's similar to the movements of a high-level player. And it's not just one skeleton, there are actually 5 soon. Kim already got rid of Zhang's team. That would explain why they haven't shown up yet. The confusion about how the members of the Skulls Guild were killed along with the Arank dungeon, all of that can be explained by what's happening now. And the only thing he needs to do is get the hell out of there. Still, he wants to understand why the monster is ignoring the skeletons and focusing only on him. Next, the skeleton rushes toward the creature again, delivering a few attacks, which makes it fall to the ground. The man wonders if the monster has been defeated, but surprisingly, it gets back up, locking its gaze directly on him. He thinks that idiot is just following him around, and it's like the skeletons are invisible. Jean is watching everything from afar, saying it's easier for him now that the guy is distracting the lizard warrior. He probably doesn't understand why this is happening right now. There was a time when people relied only on their level and items, especially when clearing dungeons. A flashback appears of the man saying he doesn't know the details, but he heard that lizard warriors don't. Because of that, they should try to camouflage themselves with mud. Calling out to the protagonist from a distance, he asks if he was right, but our hero says that's not it. The scene returns to the present, with Jean saying he wonders if those guys are doing okay. Meanwhile, that Skulls Guild guy is running from the creature, thinking he can't keep this up. He doesn't know why, but it seems the lizard only detects players at that moment. He decides he shouldn't be suffering alone, and that guy is going to be dragged into this too, luring the lizard in direction of the protagonist. But at that very moment, the skeleton appears. The other guy jumps and asks how a skeleton soldier dares to block his path. Right after, the guy passes the skeleton, but realizes there's another one which attacks him instantly. Right after, the man falls to the ground. Even his mask is broken. Looking back, he sees that monster charging at him, delivering a blow. Our hero watches from afar, and the man is in pain, struggling with his legs. The man looks to the side again, watching the skeletons pile on top of the monster. Happy. He thinks it's finally been defeated, and now he can finally get out of there alive. Right afterward, our hero appears, thanking him for distracting the lizard warrior. But it's time to end this, and the man, confused, asks what the protagonist means and if he doesn't want to negotiate since he should help finish the dungeon. Our hero accepts the offer, saying he's asking for help, but he should have done that for the guy who was beside him, not for him. At that moment, the lizard gets back up again. Jean says he must be wondering why the monster only follows him. The reason is that its eyes work as heat sensors, so it goes without saying that it wouldn't be interested in something like a skeleton. After all that discussion, the guy finally understands what happened. But it's already too late, because the monster is charging straight at him. In the next scene, several news reports are appearing around the world, because the dungeon boss is a deadly serpent. A statement from the Phoenix Guild says they refuse to enter the dungeon. The scene cuts to Yamua, who's watching the news. His secretary says that these kinds of problems always pop up when he's planning to conquer a 6th-floor dungeon, and the timing couldn't be worse. As expected, public opinion about the Phoenix Guild is terrible. Frustrated, Yamua says it's a waste of time listening to those weaklings. They should just focus on the 6th-floor dungeon. At that moment, breaking news appears about a statement from the Messiah Guild. A woman on TV says that since this is a matter of the highest importance, they'll conquer the dungeon after fully preparing themselves. However, the comments say they would only trust the Messiah Guild, apparently very frustrated by what happened. Yamua, meanwhile, was also watching the news, which reported that even the Messiah Guild had his friend. Says it's obvious because there's a reason for that, and it's called the Death Serpent. There's also no player who has returned alive after hunting that monster, and it's pointless to even discuss how hard it is when it comes to that person. Yamua thinks that a monster that strong has shown up on the continent, and yet there's still no available information about it. People accepted the Messiah Guild's decision without any problems, but he wanted to know if the Messiah Guild would announce that without any hidden motives. Seeing the news, the guy wonders if it's really not possible, asking what he thinks would happen if all the guilds delayed their entrance into the dungeon. The guy says that only those without fear would gather. Even though it might be hard to complete the dungeon over time, the government would also want to get rid of the dungeon, and other countries would also open theirs. Yamua says he's right, and putting it more simply, the dungeon would be conquered on a larger scale, asking what would happen if someone showed up and managed to defeat the Death Serpent right now. The guy, surprised, asks what he's saying and if by any chance they were trying to buy more time on purpose. Stekken says he's not sure about that, but if you think about all the abilities involved, there might be some reason they're delaying their entrance into the dungeon. In the next scene, the protagonist is messing with the body of that creature. The system notifies him that the emissary of the underworld had granted him part of his authority. Jean thinks it ended faster than he expected thanks to the fact that skeleton soldiers don't have body heat. But since he got involved with those guys connected to the Messiah Guild, it's going to be difficult for him to walk around freely. The boy begins examining the sword he had taken from that guy, thinking that the weapon the swordmaster used isn't half bad. Handing it to the skeleton, he tells him to use it from that moment on. The skeleton then picks up the weapon, starting to observe his reflection in it. Approaching the other man, the protagonist says they need to have a little chat. The scene cuts you outside the dungeon, and the dungeon had finally been completed. Jean, stepping out of the portal, says everyone was killed except for him. The secretary asks what he means and if he could explain in more detail since he needed to write a report to send to the guild. But our hero says he can just write that the warrior lizard was stronger than expected. Leaving that place, our hero receives a call saying that the situation had been dealt with the way he instructed. Everything went just as Park Young-hwan had predicted, and one of the guys who was hunting him was using a unique ranked sword that belonged to the swordmaster. Since he knows the master is an important member of the Messiah Guild and also the head of the Yamato faction, he's sure that the Japanese faction is the main base of the Skulls Guild. Our hero starts looking to the side, saying he couldn't find anything else, but in any case he should be able to uncover more information if he looks closer. Ending the call, He says he'll get in touch again soon. Our hero leaves that place in the next scene. With a small grin on his face, he seems to be cooking up a plan. A flashback appears with the guy asking if he doesn't trust him, and the secretary says he'll be getting in touch with someone from the guild who's keeping an eye on things. Besides that, he installed a device behind the TV just so he could stay informed. A scene returns to the present with Jean thinking that the Skulls Guild members are going to fall into their own trap, and because of that, he's curious to see how they'll deal with Park Young-hwan. At that very moment, our hero receives a call. It was from that idiot. On the other end, he says he heard what happened and asks if everyone died except for him. Jean says he couldn't find out anything else while he was busy focusing on keeping him alive, but he thinks he knows the current location of the Skulls Guild's headquarters. So, Young-hwan orders him to go to his house since he wants to hear more about it. Our hero ends the call and then gets into the car. The next scene already takes place elsewhere. Jean thinks that this Chan guy is quite cautious, wondering if he knows he's also a target. That's why he hopes this list won't disappoint him. The scene shifts again. Jean comments that it's no wonder the Messiah Guild considers him a nuisance, both because of the content and the quality of the information. While observing the dungeons he had conquered when he was still part of the Messiah Guild, he finally discovers where the source is turning the page of the book. Jean is surprised upon seeing some information about the albino lizard egg. He realizes he hadn't anticipated that Chan possessed such knowledge. There's very little information about the albino lizard egg, which is why our hero couldn't uncover its true origin. Besides that, he wants to know what's inside that egg. Because of that, he believes he has to find out directly. This is something only Lee knows, but at least it's a clue that might bring him closer to the hidden truth. That's why in that dungeon, he had to be the first to complete it, no matter what. In the next scene, a radio was playing. The protagonist on the call confirms his identity. Chan, surprised, thinks that the protagonist was finally calling him, which would result in a first exchange. In the next scene, Young-hwan asks if the people from Joan and the ones from the Skulls Guild died fighting among themselves. The protagonist replies that yes, because there's someone skilled among the Skulls Guild members. By examining the equipment, he concludes that there's no doubt they had a connection with Japan. Park comments that there are many influential factions in Japan. Soon that dungeon will be completed, and for that reason, they need to start keeping a closer eye on this matter. Since he survived 2 dungeons while all Skulls Guild members were wiped out, they're going to start monitoring him closely. Because of that, Jean should stop acting on his own until he finishes clearing the dungeon. Then the secretary informs that the money was deposited into the protagonist's bank account. Park says that's his reward and that he'll get in touch again after the dungeon is completed. In the next scene, the protagonist had already left Park's residence. Apparently, he was happy about something, thinking that now that they know Park is helping, they're going to watch him more closely. Even so, he's looking forward to seeing Park's reaction when they meet again. Now that he's taken care of all urgent matters, he believes he should at least go against Park's wishes. In the next scene, he heads to another place. The secretary informs that preparations are complete, but she wasn't expecting the protagonist to show up, at least judging by the situation. On the other end of the call, Si-chun says not to worry because if there's a problem, he'll talk to him directly. In the next scene, our hero approaches a house. On the other side of the door, he hears a conversation. Lee Jean from the Phoenix Guild seems to be someone the protagonist knows. At that very moment, our hero enters the place. The secretary informs him that an instructor will accompany him since he didn't choose any dungeon of his level. Lee thinks that Man is a player known for being unable to die. When he was used as a hunting dog for the guild, that Man escaped him twice. Also, he didn't know that the protagonist had any connection with Si-chin. Jean comments that it's the first time he'll meet an instructor and asks if they'll have to enter the dungeon together. The other man replies by asking if he didn't hear what the secretary just said. Jean apologizes and asks if he prefers to be called sir. In the next scene, the man gets irritated and asks if Jean is looking for a fight. Changing the subject, Jean asks if he can talk to Mr. Si-chin. The secretary responds yes and says he can use a device for that. Grabbing the device, our hero asks if he can hear him. Stay-chan on the line asks what the problem is and if he doesn't like the instructor, he'll accompany him. Jean replies that it's not because of that. He asks what would happen if the instructor died during the dungeon. After all, you never know what might happen inside a dungeon. Irritated, the instructor asks if he's being threatened on the call. Si-chun repeats not to worry because that man is skilled enough to protect himself. At that moment, the man stands up. He grabs the radio from the protagonist's hand. He says he thinks his client is a lunatic and that if, once inside the dungeon, he doesn't turn out as expected, hell just get rid of him. Stay-chun, nervous, asks what he means by that. The secretary informs them that the discussion is over and they should proceed with entering the dungeon. Leaving the place, the instructor tells Jean not to do anything stupid. Jean thinks he's not bluffing, judging by his past memories. Even so, he's quite lucky to have run into someone with such a deadly nickname from the window. The secretary watches from afar, thinking that they just left and wondering if everything is really fine. Saying there's a chance the inspector might not return. Stay-chun says that if that happens, Jean will become his enemy. In the next scene, the group had already entered the dungeon. The system notifies them that the next objective is to defeat 111 wolves. Jean asks if Jean isn't happy for having pissed him off earlier because now Hell do his best to ignore him. Since there are 111 wolves, Hell just watch what Jean can do and wait until the protagonist asks for his help. Sitting on a rock, he tells Jean to go take care of all of them. However, our hero doesn't seem pleased. The guy starts feeling bad for him and asks if it's that hard to the point where he can't handle it alone, but either way he doesn't really care. If Jean wants help, Hell have to kneel and beg for it. Jean thinks that guy received the blessing of the Testajex River, and that only those who have the persistent life fighter as their nimbus can obtain that legendary ability. Even if his head is cut off or his heart shattered, he becomes immortal as he begins to walk away. Our hero says that guy is probably feeling lucky for having an immortal body. The guy looks ahead and seems surprised a skeleton appears out of nowhere in front of the protagonist. Jean thinks he's going to break him out of that illusion. In the next scene, that skeleton is defeating a goblin. The guy says Jean's little pet is good at fighting and asks what its name is. Had always wondered about something, but now he knows. Because this is the reason why Jean clears dungeons alone. Thinking it's unbelievable to see because that flimsy skeleton seemed like a burden in his mind. But it can wield a sword like a high-level player. Besides that, Jean is far too dangerous to become an enemy. And as expected, he's not just some random guy. All the information he gathers, Hell report to Sikon later. The guy says Jean did really well and that he believed he didn't need any help. That's why Hell tells Sikon about him. Once they're done there, the protagonist replies that it's all good, hearing that the guy is surprised. Just now, it seemed like Jean spoke informally to him at that moment. A shadow appears behind the man. He notices it. Several skeletons show up in that place. The guy comments that those skeletons suddenly started getting a bit aggressive and asks what Jean did. Jean remembers that the man said he would just sit and watch everything. But the guy says he was just joking. He apologizes if he offended Jean somehow. After that, the guy jumps charging at the protagonist. But the boy grabs him. In the next scene, Jean seems confused. Thinking that Jean moves like he had predicted everything. Even so, he keeps hiding his true abilities and wonders what Jean could gain by getting closer to them. Right after, the guy says he doesn't know what Jean wants, but that he won't get anything from him because he's good at keeping secrets. Jean replies that it doesn't matter anymore. He then orders the skeletons to corner the guy, putting their swords to his neck. Moments later, they had already tied him up, leaving him hanging high up in a tree. Jinha, confused, wonders how long he's been there. He asks the protagonist for food and questions if he really plans to let him starve to death. After that, our hero cuts the rope. The guy falls to the ground. Jean says Hell give him a chance and that's why he should get ready. Because they're going to show off their skills. He asks the guy to be bait so the skeletons can attack freely. After that, Hell be released. The guy refuses. The protagonist already grabs his rope again and asks if he's really not going to do it or if he'd prefer to be hung up again. With no other choice, Jinha agrees. In the next scene, the guy seems to be defeating some monsters. But more of them keep coming, surrounding him from all sides. Even more monsters appear, starting to bury him in the middle of the creatures. Behind one of the wolves, a shadow appears. And then that same skeleton from before shows up, beginning to attack all those wolves. In the next scene, the other man manages to free himself from the creatures. Our hero observes the situation from afar. And the guy meanwhile is defeating the wolves. Apparently very exhausted. Even so, he had leveled up. Looking up, he sees the protagonist, who thinks that guy is still strong after all, and for that reason, he'll be very useful in his future. In the next scene, Jinha is running. The guy is dead tired, saying this is insane. The wolf, meanwhile, is running after him. Annoyed, he says he doesn't get a second of peace. In the next scene, one of the wolves is being defeated and the skeleton is with the crazies attacking those wolves. From afar, the other guy was resting looking down. He noticed there was still one more wolf. Right after, he grabbed it by the face, throwing it toward another skeleton, which then began observing the creature. Jinha says they were overwhelmed there because they picked the wrong master. Unlike that lunatic, they were actually doing all the work approaching the skeleton. He suggests a handshake, but the skeleton had that dumb-looking face. Then it turned its head to the other side. The guy gets really pissed, asking how it dares ignore him when he tries to touch the skeleton. The creature dodges again, making the guy even more frustrated by what had happened. From a distance, our hero observes, thinking that he's really different from how he remembers. A powerful man who fought against the Messiah Guild with an immortal body. And because of that, the leader at that time was one of the strongest men he ever met, with a fighting style that destroyed even himself, breaking his own bones just to be able to make use of immortality. That's why he couldn't get near the guy. And even so, he sees no trace of that malice in him at the moment, which obviously means there must be some trigger that causes him to change. Assuming that Chan's death is what awakened that man, which would mean that if Chan were still alive, there's a high probability a Messiah Guild would vanish in that new future. From afar, Jinha was watching the protagonist, watching him, thinking he doesn't know if Jin has bad intentions. He's been drawing in the exact number of enemies he can handle without dying. And that's not a coincidence, but tying perfectly with his recovery periods. This isn't just simple monster and dungeon analysis, it's something that only someone with full understanding of everything happening could pull off. He doesn't like to admit it, but the protagonist surpasses him in every way. In the next scene, our hero is approaching Jinha, saying they should move on to the next floor, because it's going to be way more interesting than this one. Moments later, the group was already heading to the second floor. The guy says he's really tired and thought he was going to die. Besides, he worked all day and asks if he can at least rest for a bit. After that, the protagonist pulls out some healing vials. The guy says that doesn't look like potions and asks what it is. And the protagonist says he better start running. The guy asks why all of a sudden. Right after, our hero throws the vials to the ground. The guy doesn't understand anything, asking what he's doing with a grin on his face. The boy tells him to start running again. Some noises start coming from the forest. The guy, for his part, had already noticed it, and at that moment, a giant lizard appears, starting to stare at him with those eyes, frustrated. He thinks he doesn't get a single moment of peace. The scene shifts to a man reading a newspaper with the news about the Korean government approving the entry of a foreign guild into the Hangya dungeon. Stachin says they should have predicted this would happen as soon as the Messiah Guild gave up, asking how far the list of foreign guilds goes. The secretary says they finished gathering the morning and all they need to do now is compare and analyze, changing the subject. She wonders if the instructor is doing okay. In the next scene, it cuts back to Jinha, who was running like a maniac, wondering how he ended up being the only one getting hunted down there. Behind the lizard, the skeletons were chasing along like maniacs. The guy thinks he doesn't know exactly, but it seems like he has to act as bait at that moment. Right after, he ends up face to face with the creature, asking if this is better than the first floor and saying that's why he's going to kill the boy once they get out of the dungeon. At that very moment, the lizard tries to bite the guy from afar. Our hero is watching. The man continues to hold back the monster, saying they should stop dragging this out. At that moment, a skeleton appears behind the lizard, and the boy continues the sentence, saying they should finish this. After that, the skeleton lands a precise strike. Not just that, the other two skeletons do as well. The guy thinks those skeleton soldiers seem to have been trained to get that good, and if there were anyone else, the summoned skeleton soldiers would normally be used as support to buy time. At that moment, the creature starts to roar, striking one of the skeletons, which manages to dodge, and the other skeletons begin to back off afterward. The creature starts eyeing one of those monsters, which in turn had noticed that, but the creature then shifts its gaze back to the other guy. He says that the lizard is unable to see the skeletons, and that's the reason the monster is only following him, watching the protagonist. He wonders what kind of magic he has, thinking that this was his plan from the beginning. Right after, the guy is hit by an attack, one so strong that it went crashing through the trees. In the next scene, he was using an enchantment, all of that just to recover from the damage. Our hero thinks it was as expected, because he recovers instantly even after taking all that damage. The creature once again continues watching the guy, who says it's a waste of his calories. Then he casts the enchantment again, and a few metal fists appear in his hands. In a matter of seconds, he leaps, appearing in front of the lizard, clenching his fists, He delivers several blows toward the monster, which then falls to its knees. Taking advantage of the situation, the skeletons appear, trying to attack the monster from behind. Frustrated, the guy thinks those skeletons are using him as bait just like their master. But the skeletons couldn't care less and continue attacking the lizard, which by then was already starting to get injured. One of the skeletons takes the opportunity and leaps, landing a blow to the lizard's head. At that moment, it collapses to the ground. Defeated, the guy who had been used as bait was just watching. Soon after, our protagonist descends from the tree. Then the shifts to an orc who was fighting against all those skeletons. Next, he falls to the ground. A hooded man, meanwhile, was watching the battle, saying that if they keep going back and forth like that, they'll break one by one. The system notifies that he has obtained the Troll Hunter achievement. However, he is unfit to receive the underworld emissary's attention. The unknown man thinks he killed 50 trolls on his own, but still hasn't earned his attention. The scene returns to the protagonist. The other guy says they should leave if they're done, or if, by chance, there's something else to be done. Our hero responds that yes, there's still something even more important. As he approaches the lizard, Jin analyzes it with his hand, running it across the creature's body, wondering if what he was looking for might be in there. Then he delivers a precise blow with his sword, opening a breach in the lizard's body. The boy, pleased, says that it's finally in his hands. In the next scene, the system notifies that he has found an albino lizard egg. Jin thinks that the Messiah Guild did everything they could to hide what was inside that egg, and now he's going to find out what it is. The guy thinks that now that he's heard about this, the dungeon's completion requirement must have been to retrieve an item. Have forgotten that while wandering around all day asking what he's going to do with the item. Without wasting any time, our hero strikes the egg with his sword. The guy asks what he's doing, since they don't even know the egg's purpose yet. At that moment, a glow begins to shine from the item. Our hero apparently knows what it is, and a skill page was surprisingly inside the egg. Jinha is shocked because he can't believe there was a skill page inside the egg. However, our hero didn't look very pleased, as it seems he received yet another poison skill. Wondering how that skill ended up there. The king of deadly poison doesn't control all types of poison but takes no damage from any due to his ability. He's a villain who uses his strength to take what he needs from people and brutally kills them with poison. All of that happens at the height of his atrocities. When the Messiah Guild declares they will judge the immortal Poison King, many members of the Messiah Guild, including himself, join forces to defeat the king of deadly poison. However, many of them lose their lives in the process. That's why he was so surprised to receive that guy's skill in this place, since he had never heard of that skill before. The only answer is that the Messiah Guild gave that ability to the immortal Poison King and purposely made him a villain so they could be the saviors. That's how Lee made the protagonist realize again that the deaths of his companions were in vain. Now that he has this skill, their suffering will not be repeated. After that, our hero tears the page, receiving all the abilities. He makes a vow because he is certain he will kill that bastard Lee. Meanwhile, Jinha was watching the protagonist, wondering why he's in such a bad mood. In the next scene, the portal had already been completed. The group, meanwhile, had already left the dungeon. Seeing a few bags, Jinha comments that Sechin is really a sensible man for leaving something for him to eat, because he was starving, but his expectations are shattered when he sees there was only a bottle of water. The scene shifts to Sechin, who is having to listen to all that yelling. He asks who's being such a pain in the ass. Even so, the dungeon was completed faster than expected. They finish in less than 3 days and ask how the experience was. Jean replies that it wasn't bad and asks if anything happened while they were inside. Sechin says there's no news of Park Yanhwan entering the dungeon. However, there's an external issue because that giant guild was gathering. Also, the dragon hunter took down the golden dragon in a 5-floor dungeon. The skin of that dragon is solid and highly resistant to extreme heat. They expected that armor made from that skin would open a new world for players. However, what really changes the story isn't the skin but the gastric juice of the golden dragon. Jean isn't sure about the special use of that material since it was left out. Later, it was discovered that it can remove seals and curses. Moreover, Lee's sword was also unsealed using the golden dragon's gastric juice. Its value exceeds expectations, and that's why Jean needs to obtain it before people find out. Stay-chan says those were the only major events from the past few days and asks if there's anything else they'd like to know. Rose wants to hear some details from her instructor and then plans to give him a phone to contact him in the future. She mentions that it's much safer because her communication cannot be traced. Jeanhead gets really annoyed and asks if they're not going to let him rest first, also questioning whose fault it is that he worked so hard. Stay-chan, however, says he'll give him some food so he should just head back. Irritated, Jinhad says that he really pushes people too far and asks who said that a little is enough. Right after, the guy begins leaving the house thinking he'll still have to keep cooperating with that guy in the future. In the next scene, he closes the door. The scene shifts to the next day. The guy complains that he can't even rest anymore and asks why he was called so early since he sent the report the day before. Without wasting time, Stay-chan asks him to read that paper. The guy questions what could be so important that it required calling him before breakfast. But he's already surprised by what he sees. There was some information about a certain hunting method for the death serpent. The boy asks if he's being instructed to go alone. Stay-chan replies that obviously someone skilled must accompany him. The boy assumes it could be Lee, but his level is too high to enter a 2-floor dungeon. So he asks if there's anyone skilled below level 35. Stay-chan, in turn, asks what he thinks about the protagonist going with him. The guy immediately refuses, saying he never wants to work with that excuse of a human again. Head already said before that, besides his skills, that guy is completely nuts and needs to develop at least a minimum sense of teamwork. If he has to work with him again, he says he'll go on a hunger strike. Stay-chan replies that he'd be delighted if that happened. In the next scene, he pulls out a recording where someone can be heard saying the ideal partner is someone who doesn't get in the way during battles. The boy keeps listening to the recordings and realizes it was himself who sent all that. Stay-chan asks if he remembers those recordings. The boy asks when that was recorded and why he hid it until now. Stay-chan says he's already registered everyone for the dungeon and, on top of that, provided some good bait. The boy is surprised and asks what he means by that, but Stay-chan only smiles. The next scene takes place in a place full of rubble. Our hero, meanwhile, sharpens his blade realizing it's badly damaged and he'll need a proper workshop. But before that, he has something he needs to do. Right after, he opens the briefcase at his side. He thinks that Stay-chan even has access to that kind of item and starts getting excited. Because he wants to kill every last member of Esku. The scene shifts to another place again. Jinha asks if there's still any spot left in the Death Serpent's dungeon, since he must already know that the government allowed the foreign guild to participate. Meanwhile, someone is coming up the stairs. The guy asks if it won't be difficult for him and Jean to get the remaining spots and how much they're spending this time. Right after, the person opens the door. Stay-chan asks why he would need to do that. Looking to the side, Stay-chan asks if the requested job has already been completed. The secretary replies that yes, the Russian Moscow Guild finalized the requests and also delivered the item prepared for the protagonist. They also brought the masks he had asked for. Time passes again and the scene shifts to an open dungeon. A frustrated guy complains that the mask is very uncomfortable to eat with. The protagonist, along with another guy, is already in disguise. The man asks if Jean is feeling calm now. Jean asks if he was nervous. But the guy responds that he's never been stressed in his life. He thinks that no one has ever returned alive after entering the Immortal Serpent dungeon and wonders why that bastard is so calm. Even saying all that, he's probably scared. Jean thinks that's exactly why he can't trust him, since he never imagined he'd get his hands on that. The boy asks Jean not to forget to buy food for him after the last attack, once the mission is over. He also warns him not to repeat those weird things from before. Meanwhile, the protagonist is analyzing the item on the system screen, thinking he didn't know Chan had something like that. A flashback appears of him receiving a call. He asks if Chan has thought about entering the Death Serpent dungeon and the protagonist replies that it's dangerous to just go in like that. Stiction says he expected that reaction because he knew Jean didn't like the idea. Then he asks if he's been dealing a lot with skeletons. He says he prepared something special for him, which happens to be a legendary rank. That specific ability is King of the Undead. Even though Jean George wanted it so badly, he was never able to obtain that item. Now it's in the protagonist's hands. He's never seen anyone using that item, so he's not sure of its effects. However, his plan to destroy the Messiah Guild is getting closer and closer. At that moment, someone appears asking the players from the Moscow Guild to get ready. Jean, heading toward the dungeon, thinks he needs to test the death mask on the first floor. In the next scene, all the players are already in the dungeon. A voice announces that they must survive for 5 days in order to move to the next floor. The players are surprised to find out that they now have a survival quest and get frustrated about it. The supervisor comments that it might seem easy to just hold on and not die within the time limit. But surviving alone in there will be extremely difficult, as there will be countless monsters. He asks what they're going to do, and the protagonist replies that they'll continue testing first. The supervisor, in turn, is confused, thinking he'll have to go through that craziness again. He asks if Jean didn't hear what was said in the room and if he's seriously going to do that again. But Jean replies that he got a new item and it's only natural to test its functionality. However, they can't test it here, so they need to find a calmer place. In the next scene, the protagonist summons a skeleton. The supervisor is surprised to see that now the creature has armor. Jean, meanwhile, is messing with some items in his inventory. Then he grabs one of them. It appears to be a skeleton mask. The system notifies that he obtained the Reaper Master achievement, and the protagonist thinks the increase in magic power isn't bad at all. Our hero, meanwhile, observes a sort of blue thread. That line goes directly to the skeleton's head. The protagonist starts moving his hand. Surprisingly, the thread follows the movement, apparently guided by the boy's finger. At that moment, the system notifies that he's connected. Jean, opening his eyes again, sees that the guy is standing in front of him. He asks why he's acting so strange. A skeleton, surprisingly, starts speaking, asking the guy to get his hands off him. The supervisor is shocked because a skeleton, which is nothing but bones, just spoke. The skeleton tries to move, and the guy asks why he's moving like that. Soon after, the skeleton falls to the ground. The guy thinks the skeleton died. Next, Jean asks him to get his foot off, thinking that controlling a skeleton soldier is harder than he thought. The scene shifts to another place where a guild group discusses their plan. Yang says they don't know what kind of monsters they might encounter, so they can't act rashly. He checked the situation for a few days and noticed that everyone else also gathered there. Because of that, if something happens, it would benefit his survival. He thinks that either way, there's no other group with the same influence as the Messiah Guild in that dungeon. The scene shifts to another location. A guy from another guild charges at a monster, thinking that he was scared of that survival mission at first, but now it seems really easy. When he looks to the side, he sees a skeleton attacking some orcs and is shocked by what he's witnessing, thinking that the idiot behind him was the real monster. At first, it was difficult for that skeleton to even start walking since it kept falling repeatedly. However, in a short amount of time, it was already running all over the place. These summoned skeletons are no joke. He wonders since when Jin has been able to control them. Even so, it doesn't feel fair because he's doing his best as a tank while Jin is hiding in a safe spot wearing a mask. At that very moment, the guy notices something and the system announces that a skeleton soldier has been summoned. He's surprised to realize that Jin can still use the summoning skill even in that condition. Jin thinks that he really can use the summoning ability while connected to the skeleton, but it consumes 3 times as much of his magic energy. The protagonist in the skeleton's body asks the man how he's feeling. The man replies that it's disrespectful to talk to someone without looking them in the face. Still, it's strange because that pile of bones seems to be ignoring him. Jin asks if he really wants it to be that way and if he's sure about it. At that moment, the man gets scared because he didn't realize Jin was behind him. He says he feels much better now after teaching some manners to those who don't have any. Taking off the mask, the protagonist says they should go all out now. The man, surprised, asks what's going on since he was doing his best up until now and wants to know who's coming after the orcs. Putting the mask back on, our hero says that was just a little warm-up. The man tries to make an excuse, saying his body isn't feeling too well because he's feeling a bit anemic. He wonders why he suddenly got so dizzy right after a blade is pointed at him. One of the skeletons seems to be threatening him, saying that if he's anemic, the sword can help with that. The man gets annoyed and asks if he really intends to stab him with that. The skeleton says the iron will flow through his body either way, and the protagonist comments that he must be feeling better if he's yelling like that. Jin tells him to follow since there's no time to waste. The man is deeply frustrated, thinking there's nothing he can do against that guy. The scene shifts to another place. A tree falls. it was the supervisor breaking them all. He wonders what Jin could be thinking since he's been chopping trees in the middle of monsters ever since they entered the dungeon. The scene shifts to another location. A group of people is apparently in a battle, defeating several goblins. The scene changes to another day. The groups are still fighting in the dungeon. The guy wonders why it's so boring since it was originally a survival quest, questioning whether it should even be like this. Yang says it's a survival quest and a ranking dungeon, but even so, things are too calm. So you need to explore the area even if it's risky. The next scene shifts elsewhere. The system announces that the underworld emissary begins to admire the remarkable nature, and because of that, a catalog will be given as a reward. Its effect is to strengthen the skeleton soldier's abilities by increasing the number of possible summons. The boy, without wasting time, acquires the skill. The protagonist, from atop the wall, says he should get going. The supervisor says they could still use that wall and asks why they have to leave now, since they work hard to build it. But Jin says the situation has changed and that he's revised his plan. With a smile on his face, our hero approaches one of the monsters. Apparently using his skill, the system announces that a skeleton soldier has been summoned. And at the same moment, those orcs see yet another one of his skeleton soldiers. The supervisor is shocked, asking if he wasn't only able to summon 5 skeletons. Jin confirms but explains that it was before. Now the situation has changed. The scene shifts to the forest. Yang's group, meanwhile, was apparently surrounded by several monsters. But all of them were already dead. Yang asks how many monsters are lying there, thinking it looks more like a massacre than a battle, and wonders what kind of person could have done that. Right after, one of his companions asks Yang to take a look at something. The guy asks what happened, but at that moment he's shocked because there was some kind of giant labyrinth in that place. Without wasting time, the group begins walking through that area, realizing that underneath the labyrinth, there were several dead orcs. Yang, surprised, wonders if this was made to attract the monsters and then trap them. In addition, there were more bodies in another direction. Even so, it was nothing compared to the deeper part of the labyrinth. That's why he wants to know what the person behind this is planning, because it's completely different from any battle he's seen before. Assuming that's the reason, everyone could relax even though it was a survival quest. The scene shifts to the supervisor, who says that it's not his style to use traps to catch monsters, but it depends on the situation. He asks why they keep going in that direction, since they should at least repeat that strategy. However, the protagonist says they won't need it anymore because now that his power has increased, traps and labyrinths are just a waste of time. This way, it's much faster to hunt them down. The supervisor is pleased, saying that this is much better and that now he'll use his skills. Jin then begins to enchant his sword. The guy is scared, asks why he's pointing his weapon. The protagonist replies that he's the one going up front. The supervisor says he'll do his best and doesn't really care, but he can't stand a clumsy guy running ahead of him. In the next scene, the supervisor seems tired, asking Jin to wait at least a little bit. Meanwhile, the skeletons were still running, starting to look at the other guy. But even so, they ignore him. The man gets very frustrated, asking if they're making a fool out of him, wondering if Jin is actually an idiot since he has a massive stamina pool. Whenever he fights with his own hands, his stamina drains quickly, while that guy can attack his enemies without any trouble and then run away easily. That's really frustrating, but he wants to learn a bit more about that fighting style. Looking at the guy, the protagonist asks if he didn't say he was going to show his skills. The man, frustrated, says he really was just about to show them. Beginning to charge at the monsters, thinking he has to do it even if he dies again. Jin thinks that is the Jinnah he had once known, and that he'll definitely repeat the same moves he showed before. Until now, there was no one to guide him. That's why Jinnah believe only in his immortal body and in his reckless attacks against opponents. The man had an inefficient fighting style, but now he'll become more useful over time. Still, he's wrong because in truth, it's Jin who will have to make him become useful. The scene changes again to the 5th day of the dungeon. Jinnah keeps defeating monsters, wondering why he's going so far for a survival quest, and if maybe he missed something in the monsters. Jinnah, frustrated, asks if this isn't too much even for a human, since he's been working non-stop for 8 hours straight. The protagonist says they'll take a break, and the guy quickly changes his expression, asking where they'll rest. In the next scene, Jinha is already eating. Looking at the skeleton, he asks if he wants some too, because he'll at least give him a piece. Surprisingly, the skeleton extends his hand. The man says the skeleton is opening up to him too much, telling Jin that this is a real partnership. Even so, he's very moved because that's a feeling between partners that can't be explained. He asks if Jinha is also hungry by any chance, but right after, the skeleton hands that food to the protagonist. Jinha asks if the protagonist was controlling the skeleton the whole time, and the boy says he wants to know what this so-called partnership tastes like. Jinha says that instead of buying food, the protagonist just steals it, and if he likes free stuff that much, he'll end up bald. Our hero is surprised, thinking that this is the first time he's heard about Si Chen's appearance. At that moment, both of them start hearing a noise coming from the forest. The supervisor thinks it was a rescue signal, but even so, there's little time left for the quest to end. Asking if there are still any monsters left, and the protagonist says that wasn't a rescue signal. Since they're going to the second floor after the survival quest on the first, they're calling the players to determine the hunting order for the death serpent. Jinha asks if he means that combining their power isn't enough anymore, and that's why they'll set a hunting order. Jinha says they made the other groups feel comfortable over the last 5 days, and it was obvious they'd start feeling confident at that moment. The boy summons the system window. The supervisor is surprised by what he sees, asking if that is by any chance a gold catalog. Jinha thinks that this is the main skill that John George used. Its name is Golden Explosion, and by injecting mana into a monster's body, it could make it explode at any moment. The scene shifts to another location with several guild members gathered. Yang meanwhile begins to make an announcement, saying that almost all the survivors seem to have gathered, so he'll explain the details. Mentioning that in a few minutes, the survival quest will be completed and they'll be able to move to the second floor. The Alliance, including the Height Guild, will be the first to attempt the hunt for the Death Serpent. Meanwhile, the protagonist and Jinha are at that location, and the guy asks if they're really going to set an entrance order. Yang continues the explanation, saying that since there are no objections, they should remember not to interfere in their hunt, because if that happens, he'll kill them all. Jinha, whispering into the protagonist's ear, asks if he happens to have a plan. Then someone pushes the man, asking if he understood what was said. Jinha wonders if that man is crazy and if he doesn't know how to speak Korean. However, the protagonist grabs the guy's hand, making only a subtle gesture with his head. Trying to de-escalate the situation, Jin wishes everyone good luck. Jinha asks why he stopped him, since that guy isn't even that strong. Jinha asks if he really thinks he could handle everyone in that place. Mentioning that the people with red bands tied to their arms are showing they're part of the same team, Jinha says there's no way not to notice that, thinking that must be the reason the others around kept quiet. Besides that, there's no one without a red band, asking if that doesn't mean there's no chance against those people. With a smile on his face, the protagonist asks what he thinks. Some time later, the scene changes to a giant creature. Several people from the guild seem to be near it. The creature begins to look around, and the others are afraid. Even so, they stay hidden among the trees. Right after, Yang gives a signal and all the guild members begin attacking the monster, which receives all the blows. Jinha asks if the protagonist is just going to stand there watching, because at that rate, they might really manage to defeat the Death Serpent. But Jinha replies that it's very unlikely. Jinha asks why he thinks that, and if with that number of people, they still wouldn't be able to do it. Then the boy asks what's the first thing he does when he encounters a monster. Jinha answers that he would charge at it because it's hard to deal with unexpected events if you don't rush in from the start. Our hero says that he's right, and that's why they need to analyze the situation. He asks if he would also rush directly at this monster. Hearing that, Jinha falls silent. He wonders if it wouldn't be better to attack now and take out the creature along with the other players. Jinha says it'd be great if things worked out that way. But even so, the task is not easy. He asks why no one has managed to clear that dungeon until now. Meanwhile, the group from the other guild keeps attacking the creature. Yang, wasting no time, tells everyone to keep attacking. The creature starts regaining consciousness and tries to flee the area. Yang thinks that if they keep attacking, it's only a matter of time before they defeat the monster, and he becomes the first player to kill the Death Serpent. At that very moment, the monster seems to notice something. The players block its path. The serpent tries to escape by burrowing underground. Jinha comments that those guys seem prepared, since they even predicted that the Death Serpent would try to escape. The protagonist watches coldly and says that everything is about to begin. The death serpent hasn't even truly attacked yet. In addition, it has needle-like spikes all over its body. He wonders why no one finds that strange. Meanwhile, Yang orders everyone to keep attacking, launching a series of blows at the creature. The monster takes the hits, but at that moment it lifts its tail and uses it to strike the forest. One of the players tells everyone to regroup because they need to keep attacking and are also responsible for protecting that area. The boy opens his eyes and sees several players using shields to defend against the attack. He pulls himself together and says they need to finish this. The guild members keep attacking the creature. Yang notices the serpent's movements have slowed and orders the front line to charge. The guild members quickly advance against the monster. However, it's still conscious and raises its tail again. This time it's facing forward and several spikes cover its surface. Seeing the situation, Yang orders everyone to protect themselves. But it's already too late as the spikes are launched at the guild players, hitting several at them. After that, the creature lets out a powerful roar. Everyone nearby can hear it. Jean thinks he assumed the spikes were laced with deadly poison, but realizes they're just ordinary spikes. Jean, however, watches the attack and comments that it was impressive. The scene shifts to Yang. He wonders what just happened. He already knew the serpent would have something unexpected, but he didn't imagine it would be such a wide-range attack. The group starts to regroup. Another player notices that the spikes came from the death serpent's body and is surprised to see they can be easily broken also. The inside of the spikes is hollow once again. The serpent lets out a roar. Yang realizes that the death serpent no longer has its spikes for that reason. He orders them to attack before it recovers. Once again, the group charges at the monster. Yang wonders if that was all since killing the serpent didn't seem that hard. The scene cuts to the attack group. A man notices one of his companions lying on the ground. He asks why he's just standing there and tells him to stop slacking and move. But the player doesn't seem to be in good shape. Right after, he collapses. His companion is confused about what just happened. But it's not just him. Another person also falls to the ground. The guy wonders what's going on. And several players begin to collapse as they had actually been poisoned. Another guy comments that the situation is terrible as most of the tanks couldn't continue fighting. Yang questions whether it really was poison, thinking that the spikes might have caused it. If all the tanks are down, it means the poison is deadly. Meanwhile, one of the protagonist's skeletons is observing the situation. Jinha from afar thinks that it's horrible. He asks what's going on and the protagonist replies that their plan failed because of the death serpent's deadly poison. The man mentions that those things that came from the serpent were spikes and wonders why poison is suddenly involved. He questions if the spikes had been poisoned the entire time. But Jean argues that it's not just that because even before the wide-range attack, the rear attack group had already taken damage. Jean then asks when it happened and when they had been poisoned. He reflects that he thought their attack was going well, but realizes now that the serpent wasn't called the death serpent for nothing. In the middle of that situation, someone asks what they should do and if they should help the others. The protagonist answers no because now that they've seen their praise trump card, they should just make their move. The protagonist starts moving with his skeletons. Jean asks what he intends to do and if he's actually going over there. Our hero confirms that he's going alone and that Jinha should wait there and get ready afterward. In a way, Jinha replies that he's not there to take orders from him. The boy asks if that's how it is because if he wanted to, he could go fight the serpent himself. The guy replies that's not what he meant, just that he'll stay there by his own choice. The scene shifts again to the giant serpent. The protagonist is now beside the creature. He thinks the poison has no smell and is invisible, which caused the other players to lower their guard. By the time they noticed the poison, they had already suffered irreversible damage. However, he's different from the others. His trump card is simply a poison resistance skill. The boy smiles, thinking that when Apophis power is active, the strength of his venomous blood is amplified. Looking to the side, the boy is surprised. He spots a very flashy spear. He then opens his system window. He thinks he could use his spear. With the right combination, the serpent's skin must be very thick. And instead of slicing it bit by bit, he could handle this in the most efficient way. The next scene focuses on a member of the other guild. Yang, frustrated, thinks he completely let his guard down and that the deaths of all the players are his fault. Seeing his companions, another guy asks how many people managed to escape, because those who aren't there are probably already dead. The guy is shocked by what Yang said, asking if he doesn't realize it's impossible to fight with so few people, but Yang says they'll just lose more people if they go looking for the dead, So he's going to reorganize the attack and challenge the serpent again. He's already given up on winning, but going back would be total suicide. The other man gets really upset with the situation, saying there are still many people alive and questioning if abandoning their companions is really the only choice, because it doesn't make any sense. Yang thinks that even if they regroup, the result will be the same without fighting again, because fighting without tanks is like entering a battle without a shield. At that moment, the group hears a noise coming from the forest and panics when they realize the serpent is heading their way without wasting time. Yang asks them to confirm the death serpent's location. Immediately, one of the players climbs a tree. The people below ask what's happening and demand the location right away. The boy is surprised and says that the serpent is apparently fighting a player. Another one, irritated, asks for more details. The boy responds that it's exactly what he said. Someone is fighting the death serpent. Amid the confusion, Yang thinks this definitely doesn't make sense because it's almost impossible to get close to the serpent due to its poison. He wonders how that boy managed to challenge the monster, assuming the poison might have disappeared, but that shouldn't be possible. Even so, there may still be survivors. Without hesitation, he says they should head there as well. His companion asks if he really wants to face the monster again, and reminds him that he had said it would be suicide. Yang replies that the poison seems to be gone, and thinks this is a golden chance to make up for his mistake. The scene changes to the serpent, which has taken a few hits. The protagonist's skeletons keep firing arrows. Our hero confirms he was right. Arrows don't penetrate those scales. But there's a simple way around it, poisoning the scales. Moments later, the serpent seems to have taken some damage. The skeletons simply watch. The creature charges at them, but the two manage to dodge. The serpent keeps crawling through the forest. Meanwhile, the protagonist approaches the creature's head and uses his spear to attack. As a result, it ends up getting poisoned. He comments that since the spikes are gone, many holes are left behind and hell inject poison through them. These holes are like human pores, and they must hurt a lot. Speaking to the serpent, Jim asks if it pretended to run away as if it were in danger just to lure people close. In reality, the spikes were released on purpose to open holes through which a large amount of poisonous gas would be emitted. Right after, the serpent is hit again and takes heavy damage. Jim keeps running through the forest, commenting that his poison is way worse than hers. The scene changes to another place where an orc was defeated. The supervisor says that Jim had told him to stay quiet, but now he's standing out a lot, questioning if he hasn't been treating someone this talented unfairly. Besides that, he's extremely irritated just thinking about it and wants to take it out on someone. At that moment, the protagonist takes control of a skeleton and asks if Jim prepared everything as instructed. The other says that's the last monster and asks if the death serpent is really going to show up there and how he knew that. The protagonist replies that there's no time for explanations and that they need to finish everything quickly. The scene returns to our hero, who thinks that preparations are complete and it's time to start the show. Meanwhile, one of the skeletons continues attacking the creature. A monster looks back and the system notifies that he had connected. Jim has apparently taken control of the creature. Looking to the side, he sees some spears and grabs one of them. He charges at the creature again and lands another poison blow on the serpent. At the same moment, the serpent misses the skeleton. Our hero disconnects from it, leaving the poor skeleton alone in that spot. However, another monster shows up to help, hitting the serpent again, and the protagonist says he's going to turn the serpent's body into a sieve. Jim connects to the other skeleton, starting to observe the monster from a distance and saying that the poison's effect might take time to kick in due to the size of the target. He then throws another spear and connects again to the skeleton that was in the fight, grabbing the flying spear and striking the monster once more. Meanwhile, some skeletons climb the serpent's shell and Jim comments that now she's running away because she can't handle the poison. Even so, it was all part of his plan because the serpent went exactly where he wanted. At that moment, an explosion occurs and the serpent goes wild, catching fire all over its body. Still, it keeps running and Jim thinks it's useless to run in the other direction since there are more monsters in that area. Another explosion follows. The scene shifts to another place with news about the failure of the Phoenix Guild's attack. Sechin comments that this is the end of the elite force Park Yonghwan built with so much effort, saying things are getting much more interesting now. He asks the secretary to rent a car and send it to the entrance of the serpent dungeon. The girl asks if there isn't still a week left before they return. But Sechin replies that he didn't spend that much money for nothing and that he wants to see skills being shown, not sightseeing around the area. The secretary asks if it wouldn't be better to rent any car like they did in that junkyard since they were disguised as Russians, so she says she'll prepare a diplomatic vehicle to avoid any immediate commotion. However, Sechin tells her to wait and asks if there's any diplomat who rides in a compact car. Leaving the room, the secretary replies that there isn't. The scene returns to the battle. The supervisor reflects that the protagonist not only predicted the serpent's escape route, but also used the explosions intentionally to block its movements and corner it. Our hero, satisfied, comments that the serpent finally coiled up, but it doesn't last long as it's still standing. Jean observes that judging by the serpent's condition it's panicking, but it's already too late to react. The serpent then turns its attention toward the protagonist right after. One of the skeletons fires an arrow, hitting the serpent again. Jean states that there's no need to dodge anymore as the poison has completely spread and over time its life will continue to drain. Meanwhile, Sechin's group advances toward the serpent. Yang thinks he's already recruited most of the players from the dungeon, but he still doesn't know who's fighting the creature. At that moment, the system announces that the serpent has been eliminated. The group starts to argue, wondering if they'll be able to get out of the dungeon alive. However, Yang is focused on something else. That guy actually managed to defeat the death serpent without wasting time. One of his companions tells them to follow him. Yang decides they can't leave the dungeon without obtaining some kind of result, as he at least needs to see that person's face. The scene shifts to the protagonist and the system informs that he obtained the achievement of first death serpent hunter, being granted a portion of the underworld emissary's authority. A light surrounds the hero, illuminating the whole area, and the system asks him to retrieve the yellow dragon's magic pearl, which is inside the serpent's body after defeating the creature. Jean comments that it's a hassle. At that moment, members of the other guild arrive at the scene. Jean also appears in the area. The guild begins to argue, but things get even more complicated as that guy doesn't speak Korean. Yang tries to talk to Jinha, saying they were just passing through. He adds that they're not bad people. However, Jinha doesn't seem convinced by that excuse. Yang, seeing the skeletons, thinks that since they aren't affected by the gas, they're useful against the serpent, but there's no way their failed attack was what took it down. Besides that, he insists that he needs to check the serpent's body before making any conclusions. At that moment, the group is surprised by something unusual. Everyone looks up. The serpent rises, both a completely different form. Yang is stunned, unable to understand what's happening. He starts to suspect that the protagonist is trying to turn the monster into a skeleton soldier. Yang tries to break through Jinha's defense, determined to see the face of the one responsible. But Jinha had already anticipated that move and blocks his way with a powerful punch. Yang is thrown to the ground. Questioning Jinha's aggressive behavior, however, Jinha simply repeats that they should stay away. Yang says they're leaving the dungeon, but guarantees they will never forget that man's face. The scene shifts to the protagonist, who really was trying to turn the serpent into a soldier with a smile on his face. He comments that it would save him a lot of work. But the system informs him that the summoning failed because his skill rank is too low to transform such a powerful creature. The monster begins to disintegrate. Even so, this was part of the protagonist's plan, to buy time to retrieve the magical orb. The scene shifts to another place. Two men comment that they've been there for over a week and there still hasn't been any notification. One of them says that from the start, no one had any real expectations of success with that attack. His colleague replies that even so, it would be a shock if they managed to complete the dungeon. The first says he doesn't care about that and just wants the dungeon to end already, as he can't stay there forever. And then, as if in answer to their prayers, the dungeon is finally completed. They get out of the car, trying to understand what's going on. Ahead, they see a crowd of reporters trying to find out who finished the dungeon. Yang was already on the scene, asking where the support team is. He orders them to prevent the Russians from leaving, because they were the ones who defeated the Death Serpent. Soon, one of the agents spots the Russian group. Meanwhile, the reporters beg for an interview, but the protagonist and Jinna completely ignore them and get into one of the cars. Yang tries to communicate with them from a distance, asking if they can hear him. But it's too late. The car had already left. Inside the car, Jinna comments that Sikhan must have invested a lot in that vehicle, because it's extremely comfortable. Taking off the mask, Jinna asks what item was obtained after defeating the serpent. He asks to at least know what it was since he worked hard to help. At that moment, The protagonist receives a call confirming that he managed to get out of the dungeon. Sikhan laughs, calling him Isaac Ivanov, and asks how it feels to be a hero. He comments that all the media is now watching him. Sikhan suggests they take advantage of the name Isaac Ivanov, using that fame to reach new heights. Jinnah thinks the name could be useful to gain influence and had already planned something like that even before the suggestion, so he accepts the proposal. Sikhan then mentions that something interesting happened while they were inside the dungeon. He asks if he knows Himi, Park's bodyguard. He had entered with the main team into a 44 dungeon, but everyone was wiped out. Sikhan explains that it's not unusual to lose players in a dungeon, but upon reviewing the file, he discovered that there was a Skulls Guild spy in Hymus group. That spy had information about players funded by the Yamato faction, and the Skulls Guild acted accordingly. Jinnah asks why Sikhan is telling him all this. Sikhan replies that there's no reason to hide it, since he knows very well about his relationship with Park Yin-won. Time passes. The car stops at a gas station. Getting out, Jinnah says it's time to leave that place. Then Jinnah comments that Sikhan had promised a good meal after hard work. He asks what they're doing there, and Jinnah replies that they should use that car. Moments later, Jinnah is extremely frustrated because the car is uncomfortable, and no matter how he looks at it, seems like a real piece of junk. He asks who's going to drive that thing, and the protagonist reveals that the car is his. Surprised, Jinnah quickly changes his expression and praises the vehicle, saying it's really good. Changing the subject, the protagonist says he left a bit of money in the glove compartment and that Jinnah can use it to buy something if he's hungry. Excited, Jinnah goes to check, but his expectations crumble when he finds only 2,501, wondering how that guy had the nerve to do that to him. Meanwhile, several news reports spread around the world, all trying to figure out who Isaac Ivanov is. The secretary comments that the media's tone shifted from curiosity to negativity, especially due to Yang's influence. She asks if she should execute that plan, and he confirms yes, because it's time to respond to the press. Over time, public opinion on Isaac Ivanov improves. Our hero reflects that this turnaround is impressive. It's not just a shift in opinion. Now that the statement has been released, the Messiah Guild can no longer ignore him. He believes they'll likely try to recruit him. He also realizes he can use public influence to draw the Messiah Guild to his side. Even so, he's eager to see how they'll react and knows he needs to be fully prepared when they come to him. Suddenly, the system sends a notification that Park Yanggae-won has completed the 6th floor dungeon. The scene shifts to Park Yanggae-won surrounded by reporters. His secretary approaches and informs him that she has something important to report. She reveals that Hima's group, which entered a dungeon, was completely annihilated. Park's expression changes immediately. He quickly calls his security and ends the press conference, saying he needs to leave for a checkup. Without wasting time, Park gets into a car and asks for the situation details. The secretary explains that a few days ago, an anonymous informant sent an account statement. Park asks if it's trustworthy. She admits she doesn't know the intentions behind it, but the content doesn't seem entirely fake. According to the investigation team, most of the members were attacked from behind, possibly by monsters. Hearing that, Park becomes furious, asking if they're suggesting there's a traitor among his royal guards. The scene shifts to the Messiah Guild. Someone asks how they'll deal with Park Yanggae-won's group going forward. A girl suggests leaving him to public opinion since he's been acting quite a lot lately. Another man comments that he's working with the Skulls Guild and trying to resolve that mess. The girl interrupts, saying it's not the time for impulsive actions, and asks about the last dungeon of the Lizard Warrior. The two start arguing. The man thinks that Kim is an idiot because he's not that skilled, but he's being mentioned in almost everything. The red-haired girl then declares that they can no longer maintain ties with the Skulls Guild and orders the suspension of all work with them. The man retorts, saying she can't make that decision because the guildmaster isn't present and she can't speak on his behalf. With a firm look, she replies that the decision came from the master himself. Faced with this, a swordsman falls silent and awkward tension settles among those present. Moments later, the groups had already left the conference. His companion asks what Kim Jiro intends to do about it. He says they can no longer tolerate the situation and that it seems the time has come to part ways with the Messiah Guild. Time passes again and the scene shifts to Park's house. Jim questions if Jamie's group wasn't highly skilled, saying he didn't imagine something like that could happen. Park asks for honesty, revealing that he was trying to close deals with those guys from the guild, but changed his mind it would be better if they were all annihilated. Hearing this, the protagonist remains silent, reflecting that Park Young-won is indeed very ambitious. He thinks that in a few years Park would sell all kinds of items to Japan and end up exiled. Many call him a traitor without knowing the truth, but in reality, he moved away out of fear of losing everything he had built for the Messiah Guild. Even so, he was willing to abandon his own country just to preserve his life and wealth, and that's why he wouldn't let the current situation slip from his hands. Our hero then asks to become Park's guard, mentioning that he knows Park wants to use him to hunt his enemies, but he doesn't intend to be discarded when it's all over. In this scenario, Park thinks he didn't expect Jin to accept the proposal, and even if he had to confront him, he planned to bring him to his side. Still, he would have to make a decision now, but regardless of Jin's intentions, if he can eliminate the Skulls Guild, that would already be enough. He asks if Jin is really willing to hunt the Skulls Guild in exchange for his protection. Jin confirms, saying he's willing to do it if necessary, and that it's the perfect time to settle the score with the Skulls Guild. Park is then satisfied, feeling that this was exactly the answer he wanted to hear. The scene changes to another place, with the protagonist reflecting that from now on, all the responsibilities he carried will fall to him, and for that, he'll be eternally grateful. The scene changes again. A man comments that the terms of the contract will be updated to the highest rate. Standing up, the protagonist says he understands and that besides that, he'll be under his care soon after he leaves that place. The man comments that this Jin became Park Young-won's guard, and that it hasn't even been a year since he joined the guild. Even recognizing that Jin did a good job during that time, he still thinks it's not enough to become a royal guard. The scene cuts to the protagonist inside an elevator. While some people discuss the new royal guard as he exits the elevator, the boy thinks he can't deny his luck, but that doesn't matter, because the hunt has already begun. At that moment, someone receives a phone call. Jin asks why he was called, especially at such a busy time, and if it's really something important. Our hero starts discussing a plan involving a false identity. Annoyed, Jin questions what kind of madness that idiot is planning. Jin continues saying that it's hard to manipulate guild and dungeon leaders, but even so, he'll prepare everything immediately. After hanging up, Jin comments that Jin wants to use a fake identity to enter a dungeon, and that he thinks he'll be found out soon. Jin, in turn, says that Jin doesn't even know the details and asks why he's helping that boy, and if he really started to trust him. Jin replies that he doesn't trust people. He's just trying to understand where Jin's sword is pointed and decide whether or not he should walk beside him. The scene shifts to inside another car. A man asks if Jin is really after the Skulls Guild. Another man says it's likely, since Park Young-won is also determined to declare war on the Skulls Guild. Most members of the Skulls Guild will be entering a dungeon that day, so it would be the perfect opportunity for Park and Jin to put their plans into action. But the other guy replies that he doesn't care about any of that, as long as he can enter the dungeon. Moments later, the scene shifts to Yong Island. A man asks what the boy's name is, and the disguised protagonist replies that his name is Jong. The man asks if he came alone and tells him to sign a form, since there's no dungeon summary and the document must be read carefully. Jin thinks that even though it's a rank D dungeon, the capacity is 60 people and the administration seems extremely negligent. He already expected this because that dungeon is just a trap to lure him in. At that moment, the boy notices something strange. A group of people gets out of a car watching from afar. The protagonist thinks he was expecting to find more skilled fighters. The scene shifts to Se-chun, who asks why that name was listed in that place. The secretary responds that she had already checked the list and that guy probably entered under the name Jongwon, which means he's in the same dungeon as Jin. Jin asks who that crazy person they're talking about is. Se-chun answers that he's a rookie under level 50, but problematic because he's one of the Knights of the Round Table. Besides that, they're in trouble. The scene returns to Jin, who thinks he didn't imagine the guild would send that guy, especially one of the Knights of the Round Table. His players possess legendary items tied to the legend of King Arthur, and they are followed by others who submit to them. Over time, the weakened Knights of the Round Table became Park Shina's guards and rooted their presence within the Messiah Guild. He found out too late that all of it was part of a planned scenario, and that the weakening of the Knights was caused by the deadly Poison King himself. Back to the present, Jin thinks that Gawain's necklace is with Se-chun of Hull now, probably taken from one of the Knights of the Round Table. Even so, The item is still extremely powerful, and it doesn't matter who holds it. There's no reason to hold back now. In the next scene, the protagonist is already getting out of the car, ready to prepare for the dungeon. The objective is to defeat 3,000 monsters to reach the next floor inside the dungeon. The players are surprised by the absurd number of enemies they need to eliminate. One of them comments that 3,000 monsters isn't dangerous, but it will be a bit of a grind. Another says that in all this chaos it would be easy to chase down Jean and disguise the ambush as an accident, and then they could take him out. Looking to the side, one of the companions seems to recognize someone. Looking back, he realizes it's the Skulls Guild, which explains why they were dressed that way when entering the dungeon. That also shows they have no idea what kind of situation they're getting into. Besides that, they don't even have the capacity to deal with this on their own but keep getting in the way. He's sure they were told not to get involved. He wonders how they dare disobey their master and decides he'll kill them as soon as the dungeon ends. Then he says to forget the Skulls Guild members, and all they need to do is finish the job. He asks to be notified as soon as the protagonist is found, because he has the venomous blood ability, so they definitely can't let their guard down around him. The scene shifts again to another place, and a man walks through the trees in the forest. Then he hides behind a tree. He thinks that Park Young-gaewon's royal guards also entered that dungeon at that moment. The man notices something because some skeleton soldiers were attacking players. Looking around, he wonders why he can't see Jean, but right then, the protagonist appears behind him. The man already sensed his approach and charges at the boy. However, moments later, he's already on the ground, saying he has no connection to the Skulls Guild. Pointing upward, Jean replies that this guy said something different. When the man looks up, he sees one of his companions in the tree. He thinks there's no way the other could have said anything. A flashback appears in his mind of the man saying that no matter what happens, he needs to survive and report everything to their master. Back to the present, he tries to play dumb, asking what Jean is talking about because he's never seen that man before. However, the protagonist strikes him right after. Lying on the ground, the man insists he doesn't know anything. With a cold look, our hero states that they're more trustworthy dead than alive. Then he activates his skill on the guy. Jean thinks that even by invading these men's minds, he'll hardly find useful information about Jehu, which suggests that the Messiah Guild didn't kill this guy, and neither did the Skulls Guild. He assumes they broke their alliance. The scene shifts to another location. Several people had gathered to rest after the battle. One of the move carefully to the second floor. He questions if it isn't strange that Jean still hasn't been eliminated, as he's almost certain Jean suspected something and ended up fleeing. His companion says that at least they know what to do when they find that coward trembling in fear. But he's more worried about the unknown whereabouts of the Skulls Guild members. Because no one knows what kind of situation might arise, it would be great if they could find them as soon as possible. Time passes again, and it's already morning. A group of people walks through the forest at that moment. A man notices something. He barely manages to dodge an attack. A new battle begins in that place. A skeleton is summoned by the protagonist's watch from a distance. Jean appears next to a tree. The scared man asks if he planned to use skeleton soldiers against players, stating that it's ridiculous. Then the boy appears, accompanied by a skeleton. The man comments that Jean wouldn't have gotten hurt if he had stayed hidden, but thanks him for saving time. At that moment, the skeleton charges at the man. He watches the monster calmly. Then he tries to land a hit, but the skeleton dodges with an agile jump. The man is surprised because it dodged the attack so easily. It's the first time he's seen skeleton soldiers move like that. At the same moment, our hero appears behind him, delivering a sword strike. Even so, the man manages to defend himself. Jean thinks that guy is strange, but already knew he was strong. Right after, the protagonist lands another blow. Still, a man blocks the attack and asks what Jean is trying to do, and if he made him wait all that time just to show a mediocre skill. With no other choice, our protagonist backs off, thinking that although he expected difficulty, this fight is going to be more complicated than he imagined. At that moment, the system sends a notification saying that the immortal fighter is interested in the battle. And not only him, so is the emissary of the underworld. The other man comments that he doesn't receive those kinds of notifications unless he's facing someone decent, asking if that means Jean caught the Nimbus' attention. Observing the situation, the protagonist thinks it will be dangerous if the fight continues. The scene shifts to Se-chan, who says they need to problem. Jean asks why he's so worried about something so trivial. Se-chan asks what he means by that. Jean questions what kind of player Se-chan thinks Jean is. Se-chan responds by asking if Jean is doubting it because he still hasn't figured it out, and states that he's fully aware that Jean is much stronger than Jean Ah. Irritated, Jean Ah says he regrets asking that question and that besides, he even lost his appetite. Se-chan comments that he had already eaten more than 5 whole pizzas. Hearing that, Jean Ah explodes in rage, asking if he's not even allowed to eat the pizzas he bought himself. Changing the subject, Se-chan states that that guy is a very cunning person. He never enters a fight he can't win if there's no chance of victory. He definitely won't fight. The scene returns to the protagonist and the scared man is surprised. Several skeletons had appeared in that place. All of them were summoned by Jean. The man asks if the protagonist was hiding his skills only to go all out in the end. Even so, he admits he likes it. Right after, the two clash swords in direct combat. The scared man smiles, saying this is fun. He tells Jean to come at him with everything because he's ready to deal with him. Meanwhile, the battle intensifies. The man looks at the bottle and notices something strange. The skeletons aren't going after him. Soon after, the creatures charge toward his companions. Meanwhile, one of them begs his leader for help as many skeletons were attacking him. The scared man becomes furious, calling that a cowardly attack. Jean hears and asks if he just heard a dog barking. But actually it sounded more like a puppy since he doesn't even understand what's happening and clearly doesn't belong in that situation. The man gets even angrier, saying Jean messed with the wrong person. Then he activates an enchantment. Right after, his body begins to glow. Jean watches and thinks that he finally activated it. At that moment, the skeletons charge at the man. He, however, hits them all at once, launching them far away. Jean recognizes Gawain's necklace, one of the items from the round table set, and thinks the skill's effect is amazing as expected. Analyzing the situation, the protagonist orders the skeletons to retreat. The monsters begin to fall back. The man believes Jean intends to hide again. Now that he knows he can't win in direct combat, he shouts to his subordinates that he'll go after Jean, and as soon as they're done with the skeletons, they're to follow and finish this once and for all. Meanwhile, Jean is fleeing, thinking that the man hasn't changed at all and still doesn't care about his allies. He probably relies too much on his own strength, especially Luke Gawain's necklace. But someone like him, who doesn't know how to use an incredible item like that, is worth nothing. It's like a pearl on a pig's neck. At that moment, the man appears in the area again. Amid that situation, Jean acknowledges that he can't ignore the difference in status between them. The other man thinks that no matter how much the protagonist runs, he's still in the palm of his hand. He says that after activating the blessing of the sun, it's impossible for Jean to escape. But suddenly, he steps on something, and an explosion goes off. The explosion is so strong it shakes the entire forest. His companions, watching from a distance, see the smoke rise. They ask what happened. One of them tries to reassure the others, saying that the captain isn't someone who could be taken down so easily. But at that moment, another companion is struck by an attack. The system announces that he was affected by venomous blood from afar. Jean's skeletons hit the players with their arrows. The man says they can no longer consider those skeletons a waste of time and orders everyone to prepare to defeat them. The scene cuts back to the scared man. He shouts for Jean to stop running like a coward and face him. Our hero replies by asking how it's cowardice if it's obvious he'd lose in a direct fight, so if he wants to catch him, he should run faster. The man becomes furious, saying that when he catches Jean, he'll rip him in half with his bare hands. Right after, he activates another ability called Immortal Fighter. With a jump, he charges toward Jean. The boy hears him and looks back. The man is about to strike, but falls straight into a trap, and below him were some orcs. Another explosion happens. Jean, meanwhile, just watches. The frustrated man says he's had enough and begs the boy to stop playing around. Jean replies that he lacks understanding and strategy and asks if he's considered the possibility that he's just playing tag out of boredom. He continues, saying that formulating a strategy based on the enemy's weaknesses and taking the battlefield into account are basic principles. Someone like him, who just swings his sword relying solely on brute strength, is nothing but a useless leader who harms his companions. Then a flashback appears in the man's mind with someone asking if he wasn't the infamous group killer from the Messiah Guild. Upon hearing that, the man gets irritated and tells them to shut up, demanding to know who's spreading those lies. Another guy shows up, saying that from the way he talked, it seemed like he wasn't even sad about the deaths of his own teammates, and says it's no surprise since his brain seems to be nothing but a muscle incapable of feeling emotions, charging straight into the most dangerous parts of battle. Upon hearing that, The man becomes furious and asks who he thinks he is to give him a lecture, but at that moment, the other man dodges his attack, making him fall to the ground. Getting up, the scurried man says those idiots died because they were weak, so it wasn't his fault. The other, however, says that he killed them all and deep down knows that he's just a weak leader who brings suffering to his companions. Back to the present, the scarred man says that Jin reminds him of Suzuki and for that reason, he intends to kill them both with his own hands. In the next scene, our hero states that it's about time. He says his skeleton soldiers don't need verbal commands, which means he never had to shout to order a retreat amid all that. The man finally understands, realizing that the protagonist had planned everything to lure him in. Jin confirms that he finally got it, and that if he's not mistaken, the blessing of the sun should be about to end. There were about 30 seconds left before the effect wore off. Surprised, the man asks who the hell Jin is, and Jin replies that if he still hasn't figured it out, he's pathetic. But even so, hell tell him right after the system announces that the blessings effect has ended. In just a few seconds, the medallion begins to disappear. Jin comments that it seems the necklace's effect is over and thanks him for falling like an idiot until the very end. Now it was their turn to act. At that moment, several skeletons appear on the scene. Jin says the man was so focused on chasing him that he didn't even realize where he was. In fact, they were near where the plane had first arrived because Jin had been running in circles from the very beginning. Thanks to that, his skeleton soldiers eliminated all of the enemy's allies. With that, they were able to get there in a matter of seconds. The man, surprised, wonders if his soldiers were really annihilated, and questions how Jin dared to underestimate him. Right after, acting like an idiot, he activates another ability. With a leap he charges at the protagonist again, but the boy coldly watches the blade, and then one of the skeletons blocks the attack. With a smile on his face, Jin tells him not to get so full of himself. The scene shifts to a car. Jin asks if that guy wasn't making him work too much. He also wants to know why he had to go check on that person. A flashback appears in Jin's mind with Si-Chen, saying he thought a lot about the matter, and that he'd only feel better if they went there to check how he was doing. Jin says there's nothing to check. He bets he'll walk out of there safe and sound. But Si-Chen replies that actually it's the opposite. Because if the scarred man loses the battle, they have to act fast to set up the next plan. And he who's betting the same goes for the protagonist. Since he's a smart guy, that's why he believed he wanted to figure out the goals of both sides. Like the reason they created the false identity of Isaac, or even a connection between Park Young-hwan's faction and the Skulls Guild. Not just that, but also why they keep helping Jin even knowing that the Messiah Guild is behind everything. All of this is part of the plan to bring down the Messiah Guild, and even if the protagonist defeats the scarred man, it'll still be hard to fully understand his intentions. Even so, they need to figure out whether or not he'll stay involved. More time passes inside the dungeon. Several skeletons were destroyed. Meanwhile, the other man is frustrated, realizing his body has slowed down due to the blood poisoning. Even so, there are still many monsters in that place still. He can't accept that he's losing to mere skeletons. Soon after, Ji who blocks another attack. Looking to the side, he sees another monster, but manages to defend. However, he's struck from behind and ends up getting poisoned again. Annoyed, Ji who swings his sword in anger, but something unexpected happens. His legs simply refuse to move. Watching this scene, Jin thinks that he held up well against the 12 solder skeleton soldiers. Now only 2 remain, and it would be concerning if he hadn't increased the number using the Mastery Stone. Now that Ji who is completely poisoned, the battle has lost its fun. Meanwhile, the angry man demands that Jin fight him. He says Jin shouldn't just stand there, and should at least face him head on. More time passes, dragging himself across the ground like an idiot. Ji who begs to be faced. But at that moment, he passes out. Right after, the system appears, informing that the world emissary smiled at the easy victory, and the underworld emissary shared part of his authority. Our hero then opens his system window, and finally acquires Gawain's necklace, saying this is the first time he's gotten an item from a round table warrior. Besides, that other guy will definitely show up soon. Then the hero starts searching the enemy's memories, and a flashback shows the man saying he can imagine how hard it was to get that far with that head. It was obvious he was talking about his subordinates, not himself. The scared man claims that if he's a hunting dog, he should bark like one, and since he was going to see his master head let go this time. But next time he won't be so lucky. Moments later, Ji who introduces himself as the newest member of the round table and says it's an honor to meet the great hero. Thus, Lee finally appears in that place. Back to the present, our hero is frustrated to think that Lee has finally decided to show himself. And if they find out Ji-Woo is dead, the Messiah Guild won't stand still. All those who supported Lee's ambitions turn their backs on justice, and for that, hell make them all pay. The next scene shows an orc lying on the ground. From afar, the group watches and wonders how much longer they'll have to wait. One of the companions comments that as soon as the target falls into the trap, they must act immediately to end everything without complications. At that moment, a system window appears for all the players. The dungeon has been completed, and Jean wastes no time. He's already exiting through the portal. Looking ahead, he finds Jinna, who comments that he finally returned. She mentions that she was taking care of a few things and took the opportunity to visit the place after seeing something interesting still. She has something to deliver to Jean, and asks if they can talk along the way. In the next scene, Jinna says that Hyun wants the two of them to enter a dungeon together. Changing the subject, she asks how the battle against that guy went in the middle of the conversation. Jean thinks that he already expected to be the target, but they already know everything. According to Jinwa's memories, he probably used a fake identity, but Hyun already knew that. Jinna asks if he really fought the guy in the dungeon. Our hero replies that the enemy was much stronger than Jinna. Hearing that, Jinna gets annoyed and asks if he carries a power level meter in his pocket. Jean then says that Jinwoo faced 12 skeleton soldiers and took down 10 by himself, and that if Jinna wants to prove he's stronger, he just needs to say so. Hell test him right away. Jinna quickly changes his expression and says that a truly strong man doesn't brag. Switching topics, Jean explains that it's the Hornfox dungeon in Bukshan, and there have already been 12 failed attempts to clear it. Jinna says Shell skipped the explanations and just mentions that Hell have to use the identity of Isaac again. Upon hearing that, Jean thinks there's meaning behind sending him to the Hornfox dungeon right after defeating Jinwoo, so the boy accepts the mission, and after that, Jinna gets out of the car. She calls Sikhan and says she already told him not to worry, because the protagonist never enters a fight he can't win. He accepted the mission without hesitation and already knows all the details of the dungeon. Hearing that, Sikhan reflects that he still doesn't fully trust the protagonist, but knows they'll need much more if they really want to go up against the Messiah Guild. They don't have much time, 3 years at most, and if a group capable of challenging the Messiah Guild doesn't emerge, they won't hesitate to bare their fangs. The scene shifts to another location. The protagonist thinks that this happened after he completed the Hornfox dungeon. A flashback appears in his mind with a girl saying she watched inside the dungeon and his skills are great, asking why he doesn't join the Messiah Guild. Jean says that if she wants to recruit him, she should talk to her master or make him a personal offer, and right after, someone gets out of a car, saying he has a lot of courage. Approaching the protagonist, he says he needs his strength to save the world. It's revealed to be Lee who was in that place, asking if the protagonist would like to join him. That was the first time our hero met Lee. The scene cuts to the present with a message saying he was approved for the Hornfox dungeon in 2 days and should make sure to show his skills. Jean thinks that, just like before returning, he bets the Messiah Guild guys will be there too. Turning off the phone, our hero thinks that's it for today. Save and Hell show off so much they'll be disgusted, but in truth, it'll be the value of Isaac Evanoff, and he'll be very busy making sure he's ready in time, taking some items out of his inventory. Our hero thinks that it's a dungeon he had already cleared before, so there's no better place to showcase his abilities. Time passes and the scene shifts to the Bukshan Sports Stadium. A voice asks the players to get ready because it was almost time to enter the dungeon. Jean in his disguise asks Gina if he's ready, and she replies that she is, because she's the one who conquered the Spine Snake dungeon, the one everyone said was impossible. But her expectations are crushed because after entering the dungeon, she starts feeling something. That place is extremely cold. The other guy says that if you can't take care of yourself and end up being left behind, it means you could become a burden to the group watching from afar. Jean thinks the girl knows what she's doing because sometimes the environment is more terrifying than the monsters themselves. Without wasting time, our hero tells him to move right after the two start running. The next scene goes to another place. Jean asks if it wouldn't be better to be moving with the Messiah Guild for now. But Jean asks why, and if by any chance he's saying he can't use his strength because of the cold. Irritated, Jean replies that that makes no sense. And as he starts making excuses, a monster appears behind him. Jean says that's good because he should know this, but that dungeon is going to be way harder than the Spine Snake. Hearing that, Jean is surprised and the protagonist replies that he'll find out soon enough. Changing the subject, he says they should move around a bit since it's really cold. This way they'll feel a bit warmer. Jean asks what the plan is for that dungeon since it's a survival quest, and wonders if he's going to build a wall again, but our hero replies that there won't be any need for that this time. At that moment, the system announces that the skeleton soldiers have been summoned, and the armored skeletons appear in that place. Jean, confused, asks why the skeletons are armed, assuming that armor was made from the snake's scales. And even though they work together, Jean still took all the hide for himself. Jean replies that his office should have received its share. Then Jean realizes it was Sikon who swindled him. The scene cuts to another location, where a girl is thinking that 2 people have been missing since early on and wonders if it's those Russians. Talking to her group, she asks if anyone has seen Isaac Ivano with his partner, but the other guy says they were so focused on building the camp that they didn't see anything. The girl thinks that clearing the dungeon is important, but even more important is figuring out whether it's worth forming an alliance with that Russian named Isaac. Then she asks them to finish setting up camp before she returns, but the other guy says there's no need to do that. The girl asks them to blow the whistle if anything happens because she needs to see it with her own eyes, all of that just to judge how skilled they really are. Meanwhile, the protagonist group was defeating a pack of wolves. Jean was also taking part in the battle, and the skeletons were doing the same, taking down a considerable number of monsters. The girl is watching everything from afar, recognizing that it really was a skeleton soldier whose abilities surpassed any shed seen before. The guy asks the captain what they should do, and the girl says they're showing off their power to warn that it's their hunting ground. If they go into that area, they'll only get in the way, thinking that those men are beyond their level. It's to be expected from the player who cleared the spine snake dungeon, and for that reason she needs to report back to the guild. At that moment, the group hears a whistle, and the girl says something must have happened at the camp. So they start moving, and the scene shifts to another camp, and the wolves had apparently breached the defensive line. The group of players tries to defend against the attack. At the same moment, someone appears above the wolves, striking the ground with a powerful blow. It's revealed to be their captain, who asks what they're doing. After all, they're just monsters from the first floor. That's why they need to secure the camp by moving slowly backward. Then a wolf starts to howl. The ground begins to shake. A guy up in a tree is watching the area ahead, and a horde of monsters appears in that place amid the chaos. The girl thinks their defensive line has already been broken. Meanwhile, our hero, along with Jinna, watches from a distance. Jinna says they'll be annihilated if things continue like this, asking if by any chance he's thinking of going there. A flashback appears in Jinna's mind with a man saying he was caught off guard when he asked for a skill page, but luckily, there was one available for purchase, and that skill has the effect of releasing an aura with enhancement or weakening properties back to the present. Jinna says he doesn't need to say anything anymore. Meanwhile, the girls' group is completely surrounded, and she thinks she should have known that 12 teams hadn't failed by accident. She was careless for still being on the first floor. Surprisingly, an explosion goes off where the wolves were. Another guy assumes they're reinforcements, but the girl tells him not to talk nonsense because besides them, there wasn't anyone else in that dungeon. But looking to the side, she's surprised someone is apparently holding a wolf, then throws it off the mountain. It's revealed to be the protagonist who uses an explosive skill with the corpses of the monsters, which then begin to explode. Next, Jinna appears down below, beginning to charge at the wolves with the skeletons. A battle breaks out in that place. At the same moment, Jinna uses the blessing of the sun talisman that he had received earlier. Then he connects to one of his skeleton soldiers, using the talisman hanging from his neck while inside the monster's body. The skeleton in front of Jinna begins to glow. Jinna, meanwhile, was surprised. The glow kept getting stronger, and Jinna wondered what kind of crazy aura that was, and why he had never seen a skeleton soldier do something like that, assuming they had taken some kind of steroid and gone nuts. All the skeletons started glowing with a yellow aura. Right after that, they seemed to get ready for battle. They'd all charged for the monsters at once. Jinna, for his part, was just watching, thinking it was like seeing a bunch of berserkers. Besides, it wasn't like they were super strong. It was just simple when hunting a large number of monsters. And instead of monopolizing the sun's blessing buff, he was using the shared aura field with the others, turning the buff into an area effect, which was way more efficient in situations like that. The skeletons, meanwhile, kept attacking the horde of monsters. Our hero, for his part, threw another monster, making it explode into the other wolves. Watching from a distance, the girl thought they were acting like a barrier, blocking the monster wave midway. Then she said the wave's flow had been disrupted, and that this would be her chance. The scene cuts to another place, with a guy asking if they were going to save the Messiah Guild from a tight spot. Sikshin says yes, asking if he really thinks they'd be able to act openly and hostile toward their saviors. On top of that, they'd be pressured by public opinion to repay them. In other words, they'd be killing two birds with one stone, and the secretary questions if that's really possible. Because the Messiah Guild has a lot of skilled players under their command, and to make that plan work, they'd need skills that surpass theirs. Section says that's possible because based on the protagonist's abilities and growth, he'd be happy to offer him a loan. Hearing that, the secretary is surprised, and Section says it's because while Jaina and Kim are in the dungeon, they'll do their best to keep their identities hidden that way. They can reap the benefits for as long as possible while hiding behind a mask. The scene returns to the dungeon. The wolf horde had apparently been defeated. The other guy says if it weren't for those faces, they'd be in serious trouble. The girl approaching the protagonist thanks him because it was thanks to him that they made it out alive. And if he couldn't speak Korean, they might have figured something out, but right after that, the protagonist says they had done a good job. Wasting no time, the two begin leaving that place. The supervisor asks if he had forgotten the plan, and Jean replies that since they had wiped out most of the threat, there was no more danger. Because sticking around would only increase the chance of their identities being exposed, and now that they had shown their abilities, they wouldn't be able to claim the dungeon as theirs. Besides, that dungeon had become the best way to help him level up, and Jinna asks if they're gonna do it like last time. But our hero doesn't say anything and just gives a smile. Time passes again. Jinna, frustrated, thinks he must have lost his mind teaming up with that guy. The group, meanwhile, was apparently leveling up. Jean thinks he reached level 35 and couldn't ask for more if they completed the final goal. Next, the system notifies that the emissary of the underworld used his authority to transfer a good amount of power to him, where his poisonous blood skill apparently leveled up. Jean thinks this will allow him to execute his plan soon. Jinna, annoyed, asks why he's making such a serious face and if something's wrong. Our hero says no, but before they go to the second floor, they need to do something together. Because they'll need to eat since they'll burn a lot of energy on the second floor. Moments later, the group had already prepared their food. Jinna says a team finally showed up, asking the kid to grab the food, and he replies that he has one question before they hunt the, asking if he wouldn't pass out from the pain in combat even if he was immortal, and Jinna replies that would be impossible. So the protagonist asks what would happen if his body were pierced by the horned fox and how much he'd be able to withstand. Hearing that, Jinna is surprised and asks if he did something wrong. Time passes again and the scene shifts at the second floor of the dungeon. The players from the other guild were trying to make it through the second floor in the middle of the battle. The guy says it's way too fast and asks how he's supposed to fight against that. At the same moment, he looks to the side. The captain, observing the situation, thinks that everyone is going to die like that, wondering if there's nothing they could do a way to stop the horned fox. But at that very moment, someone appears on the scene. And the guy says he's going to defeat the horned fox. The gerbil, realizing it's Russo, wonders what he plans to do on his own and asking him to wait, says there's no way to just dive in like that. But at that same moment, a different wolf appears there, beginning to observe everyone around. Then it leaps, heading straight toward Jinna, who, watching the battle, thinks it's much faster than he had expected. Right after that, the guy starts receiving all of the creature's attacks, thinking that it's just like that guy had said. It doesn't deal much damage, but it's extremely fast. Walking is the best he can do at that moment, and counterattacking is going to be extremely difficult. Not only that, but he's also losing his balance in all that snow. Then that giant wolf charges once again at Jinna, lending another blow that apparently deals considerable damage. A flashback pops into the guy's head, with Jean saying that the fox doesn't have threatening attacks, but its speed is the real problem. Jinna asks if he wanted him to stop the monster's movements because he knew he was wondering why he randomly suggested a meal. Our hero asks if he can't do that. The scene returns to the present, and Jinna seems inspired, starting to hold back the wolf. After that, the system notifies that the blessing of the river skill will activate. Jinna says it hurts a lot, but he finally caught the damned fox, successfully immobilizing it. Watching from afar, the girl thinks she can't believe it because the guy stopped the fox just by grabbing it. Still, it's not going to stay like that forever, and it will be useless if it isn't quickly defeated. While he's holding it at that moment, a spear appears beside her, being aimed at the wolf, who soon seems to notice the object, and the system notifies that the horned fox is being affected by poisonous blood. The protagonist, along with the skeletons, begins to charge for the monster. The girl, for her part, just watches, wondering if both of them are really under level 40. Soon after, the skeletons continue attacking the creature. The girl thinks they're total monsters compared to her group. The scene cuts back to the real world, and the dungeon has finally been cleared. The reporters are curious about who cleared the dungeon. Waiting for all of them to appear right after that, a car shows up there, and the reporters assume it's Isaac's car. Our hero, meanwhile, is looking at an item, asking Sikhan to make a statement on his behalf, because they need to know that if they desperately want that item, they'd also be willing to donate the horned fox. Hearing that, Jinna gets really pissed, asking if he's lost his mind because after everything they've been through, he wants to donate the item, but surprisingly, Sikhan agrees, saying he probably has a good plan. Not only that, but Jean wants one more thing because he needs to emphasize whether the Messiah Guild even wants the item in the first place. Having no other choice, Sikhan agrees to do what the protagonist asks sometime later. News about the donation of that item came to light. Jean thinks he can definitely count on those people to help him because they took care of the matter quickly. Then he gets a call from Time Passes again, and our hero is already at Park's house on the television. The only thing airing is news about Isaac Ivanov's unknown identity. Park says the only thing playing on TV is about the Isaac Ivanov guy. But either way, he's better than expected, handling things well because those bastards from the Skulls Guild apparently gave up on operations in Korea and went back to Japan. Part of him wants to annihilate them completely, but he's already satisfied with everything that's over, and Jean fulfilled his part of the deal, so he'll be rewarded. Even so, he can't get overconfident and should keep getting stronger because he still wants to rely on the kid in the future. Right after that, the secretary delivers a skill letter named Bloody Mist, and its effect is to create a mist with one's own blood. Park says he wants him to become superior as a member of his elite squad, and the protagonist simply accepts. At that moment, a breaking news alert comes on reporting that the Messiah Guild will not accept the offer, but instead will reward Isaac for saving their members' lives. Park, upon hearing the news, says that Messiah will only sink further as long as they cling to that stupid pride. Right after, the protagonist starts analyzing the news on his phone, thinking that if he had stayed quiet, they might have tried to steal a horn, stirring up public opinion. But that would only work against people considered enemies of the Messiah Guild. Besides saving the members of the guild, he was even saying he'd donate the item, so there's no way they could take issue with that to protect the image of your heroes, and if they really want the horned fox a horn, they'll have to pay a very high price for it. Moreover, if he's receiving a level 40 skill scroll, that means Park wants him to focus on leveling up. He asks if Park could guarantee some dungeons for training, and Park replies that won't be a problem. He tells him to buy some through a dungeon broker and send him the invoice as he'll handle it personally with a smile on his face. Our hero thanks him. The scene shifts to Jinna watching the news where it's announced that the Messiah Guild plans to send a gift of gratitude to Isaac Ivanov. Jinna comments that Jinna is an idiot, because that donation stump was done precisely to provoke this kind of reaction. The boy starts wondering what kind of gift he'll get, and Se-chan replies that it will be the golem summoning skill. He mentions that it came to confirm before announcing it to the press, since no matter what the gift is, ideally, it should be given before any public announcement. For that reason, they offered the golem summoning skill, and it was accepted immediately. Upon hearing that, Jinna gets annoyed, asking why he didn't get anything even though he gave his best in that situation at that moment. Se-chan shows up with a box full of chocolates, saying that since he likes food, he was preparing a special gift. Even so, Jinna doesn't calm down, saying that's the kind of gift you give if you thought they were Russian, and asks why he's acting like he bought all those boxes. Right after, when the boxes is opened, Se-chan comments that he received a dungeon purchase request made by Park Young Guy. When Jinna asks if he hadn't stopped doing business with Park, since he had cursed him out thoroughly, but now he's working with him again. Southeast Chan explains that Park wants to buy a fume tray in his new elite soldier, and that he loves maintaining an air of mystery. Jinna asks who this elite soldier is, and Se-chan replies that it's someone he knows very well. Suspicious, the boy asks if they're teaming up to bring Park down, calling them crooks. Se-chan pulls out a piece of paper and says it seems like the perfect time. Jinna notices it's a survival quest, and a pretty straightforward one, which means he could make a lot of money from it. Surviving in a ranked dungeon seems like a good way to level up while risking his life, but Se-chan questions why he's handing over the mission, since it's Jinna who's going to take care of it. After all, the boy needs to level up. But he himself admits he might not be the best person for the job. Time passes again. Jinna is already inside a dungeon, thinking to himself that he had to enter yet another one with that lunatic. It's revealed that the protagonist is there, and he asks if they should start with a brief walk. The scene shifts to the Hansung Group, building South Korea's #1 financial company, had become the most influential in the world thanks to sponsorship from the Messiah Guild. Seaman asks if it's true that Yang Jae-hoo died, and the other confirms, saying he entered the dungeon to capture Jin, but never returned. The girl comments that he went off to do something nobody asked for, and questions the whereabouts of Gana's necklace. She reflects that it's not hard to replace Jae-hoo in the guild, but there's no item that can replace the necklace. The recent failures of the Skulls Guild show they're not all that, but this little spark has sparked tensions, putting the alliance that once seemed perfect at risk. At the center of all the problems is Park Young-won. If she had known things would turn out this way, she would have gotten rid of him earlier. But now that his power has grown, the only way is to try and reduce it. She asks what happened with the new elite squad member of Park Young-won. The man replies that they're trying everything to eliminate him, but Park does everything he can to protect him, and they can't even get close. The girl tells him to stop with the excuses because all she wants to know is how to eliminate that person. The man says they already assembled a team to capture Jin, and when asked who's leading the group, he replies that it will be Suzuki. She thinks she can trust whoever holds Lancelot's ring, and asks where those people are. The scene then shifts to the protagonist saying he can finally use the gift he had received. Shevna thinks that the more he learns about the guy, the more incredible he seems, and he's probably the only one who could level up that fast. In such a way he was setting up traps after analyzing the environment. Not only does he know what kind of monsters will exist regardless of the dungeon, but he also knows their precise locations. The most impressive part is that he knows the most efficient way to hunt them all, as if he could predict everything that happens. Then Jin says he should be able to walk out of Tiger's mouth alive. Jin asks if once they complete their objective they could finish the dungeon, but Jin says it's the opposite because now that they've got some new skills, they need to go all out to measure how much offensive power they actually have. Time finally passes, and the group is finally leaving the dungeon. Right after that, the secretary appears asking if by any chance Jin is okay, and whether he got hurt, but the only thing the boy says is that he's really hungry. Wasting no time, the protagonist asks if he can speak with Si-chin. The girl then hands him a phone, and the protagonist thinks that around this time he should be in the city of Kaesong. On the other end of the call, Si-chin wonders what Jin is thinking after the portals appeared. North Korea opened up a loophole to accept help from the outside world, and that was the city of Kaesong, where entry was unrestricted. But if you could destroy the dungeon, anything was allowed. The scene shifts to a bus in motion. A boy on board seems nervous. Another guy asks if it's first time being a pack mule, but the guy says that's not really it. The man says anyone could tell it's his first time, but doesn't think he's there for a violent crime, asking if he swindled someone. Besides, he shouldn't worry too much since most of them are in the same boat. But it's still not pretty because most people there are killers. He asks how great the world is considering they could go active at any moment and make a decent amount of money. Another man says he was betrayed by someone he used to trust. The guy says he doesn't know who did it, but he's gonna have to work hard to make them pay. And if he needs his help, just ask. In the middle of that situation, the man thinks that this is exactly the price of having betrayed the world because he's definitely gonna make that person pay. Then someone receives a message asking how the deposit is going, and the other guy replies that there's no one suspicious and it's not worth treating them as disposable. After a long while, the bus finally arrives at its intended destination. The scene shifts again with Jinna talking about North Korea, asking if Jean really went there because that place is where all the scum gathers, questioning what he was looking for by going to a lawless city. Se-chan, meanwhile, seemed nervous, saying he came just in time for dinner so he could suck his blood. Jinna says he just remembered about the skin of the deadly snake, and Se-chan quickly changes the subject, saying he has no idea why Jean went to that place. The boy says he changed the subject probably because he's hiding something, and Se-chan says it's a terrible time for the protagonist to be there, because there's a guy there who's a monster far stronger than him. He's around level 50 and no one compares to him at that tier, thinking he hopes he's wrong, but he doesn't want those two meeting anytime soon. Jinna asks if he's saying there's a monster stronger than Jean because if such a person existed, he'd have heard about it, asking what his name is, and Se-chan replies that he's probably heard it before. His name is Suzuki. And the scene cuts right back to him, saying it's time to start the preparations, and that the queen wants them to control the pace of leveling for the next target, whose name is Jean. His companion says he's never heard of that person. Suzuki says that since the queen wants them put on standby, he must not be an ordinary guy, but it's still relevant because they simply need to hunt as ordered, and now that a new prey has been selected, they need to clear this dungeon quickly and begin the investigation, asking where the deposits are. Another guy says they received a message from the man they put in command, saying there was nothing wrong, and that they could proceed as planned. Another man, watching from a distance, thinks he didn't expect to find Suzuki in those conditions, since just a few days ago he was avoiding him as much as possible. He's a hunting dog who tears through everything and everyone for the sake of the Messiah Guild, and when he reached level 100, they had to restrict his activities because he was so busy. So the Messiah Guild had to find another hunting dog to work from the shadows. Jean only found that out later. But if it hadn't been for that, Lee would have never started paying attention to him. Either way, Suzuki is someone that definitely can't be underestimated, and that's why he has to be killed now. At that moment, a system notification appears, asking to defeat the Red Orc in order to proceed to the next floor. Time passes once again. A man is lying on the ground, and the other guy says that one of the cargo just killed one of their men and ran away. He asks his captain what they should do, if they should go after him. Looking at the body, Suzuki thinks the man was killed in a single strike, the blow landing in a vital organ without hesitation and with extreme precision, thinking that he must have killed at least 1 or 2 players before he immediately orders them to cancel their plans because they now have to take care of all the cargo they brought. Right after, all the players draw their swords. The other guy asks what's going on since the cargo, didn't even have weapons in their inventory. But without mercy, another guy charges at him, easily taking him down. Desperate, the other man yells for everyone to run, but it's already too late, and the only thing that can be heard are their screams, as they're easily taken out. Another man says they've defeated them all, asking if they should spread out to search for that person. Suzuki says that running away after killing just one means he wants to betray them and is probably completely alone, planning to eliminate them one by one once they scatter. They need to use a less obvious tactic and gather information about the prey, which should be the top priority. At that moment, Suzuki notices something and a stone golem appears in that place. Suzuki thinks that the nimbus of that person is probably an emissary of the underworld. Thinking he can't use other summoning skills without a sacrifice, he says the plan will change. They'll take down that golem first. Right after, another man casts an enchantment, binding the golem with several lines, saying that golems have high resistance against sharp weapons and everyone should switch to blunt ones, because they won't have much trouble if they take out the monster's legs first. And the group starts attacking the monster's legs. The other guy thinks they're able to switch weapons without being ordered, and on top of that, they have excellent teamwork. The players keep attacking the monster. One of the men leaps, landing a strike on the monster's head. Another guy, watching from a distance, wonders what that sound was. A beam of light appears, aimed directly at him, but the man barely dodges. It's revealed to be several arrows. The guy then apologizes. Suzuki tells him not to underestimate that guy just because he's alone, thinking that he was targeting the healer while everyone was focused on the golem. Not only is he familiar with that kind of work, but he must also be highly skilled, able to land long-range attacks and summon creatures at the same time. At that moment, his companion says another attack is incoming. Seeing several shadows from a distance, he wonders if they're players. Using his bow, the other guy says hell, buy them some time, so he should get into formation. Without wasting time, the man fires his arrow, aiming it at those shadows, which shortly after hit their target. The guy, surprised, thinks they moved right into the arrow's path and dodged it at the same time, wondering who these people are. Right after, the hoods of the figures come off, and it's revealed they're just skeleton soldiers. But it was already too late because the man had been attacked, barely managing to dodge backward, wondering if that thing is in way too agile for just a skeleton soldier. A battle starts taking place in that area, and the other guy thinks they're completely relentless since they don't need to recover from injuries. Also, he's never heard of skeleton soldiers that can fight that well. Suzuki, meanwhile, keeps attacking the skeletons, thinking they're probably mimicking the summoner's movements, which gives him an idea of how skilled that person must be. And nothing good will come from continuing this battle. Right after, Suzuki defeats a skeleton soldier. His companion is surprised, but Suzuki says not to assume they're just ordinary skeletons and to not let their guard down because they're wearing armor, so they should aim for the exposed areas. Wasting no time, the guy contacts his teammates, saying that from now on, they'll focus on the unarmored parts. The players, meanwhile, keep attacking the monsters, now aiming at the parts without armor, and it seems to be working. Suzuki thinks he can feel that person hiding from something in the middle of that battle, and if he can take care of whoever's summoning those monsters, he might be able to resolve the situation. Looking to the side, Suzuki thinks he found him, and without hesitation, charges toward the person at that moment. He slashes, cutting through the hood. But the man realizes something, as only the hood was sliced. Also, the person in front of him is wearing a skull mask, assuming it could be the hunter of the thorn snake, whose name is Isaac Ivanov. The next scene cuts to a skeleton being defeated. Another man says there are only 2 skeleton soldiers left, and looking ahead, he recognizes the protagonist, Isaac Ivanov, wondering if he wasn't on friendly terms with their guild. Amid the situation, our hero thinks it's time to start Plan B. Right after they begin fleeing from the battle, Suzuki wonders if this was a plan to lure him in, and if that's the case and they end up buying time, they'll be at a serious disadvantage. His companion says they lost 4 of their men, and because of that, they have to chase them, but Suzuki replies no, they should stay on alert. However, the other guy just ignores him, saying he's clearly weakened, and begins to pursue the protagonist. Suzuki tries to stop him, saying it's a trap, but at that moment, an explosion occurs. The group is confused, wondering what just happened. Suzuki says they must be on full alert because without visual contact, there's no telling where the person might appear. Right after, a silhouette emerges from the smoke. Meanwhile, the other guy is badly injured, saying he lost control. He starts coughing up blood, and the system announces he's been poisoned. Suzuki, surprised, notices that guy's blood is a different color. Wasting no time, the healer appears, saying hell heal him. But Suzuki stops him, saying the color of his blood changed, so it's already too late. Right after, the man falls to the ground, saying it's just a mild poison and still he's fine, and lunging toward the healer, says he doesn't want to die like that. Right after, Suzuki strikes his companion, thinking there was no intel, saying Isaac Ivanov used poison. Even so, he wants to know why he never used it from the start. The man seems to realize something. His companion says he didn't notice because of the explosion, and wonders why that black mist isn't dissipating. Suzuki realizes it's poison, ordering everyone to get out of the mist. The group, confused, wonders what's going on, but it's already too late because they've all been poisoned. Suzuki thinks that was his goal, to use the poisonous mist to leave his subordinates without a chance to defend themselves. At that moment, a skeleton appears behind Suzuki, but it's not targeting him, it's actually going for his subordinates. Then the protagonist appears behind Suzuki, but the man manages to block the attacks, and both of them retreat at the same time. The system announces that the executor of the Sacred Light is taking an interest in this battle, and Suzuki realizes it's a Nimbus alert. As expected, this guy is well above Jiho because he wanted to distract him and then finish him off with a strike, so if he's not careful, he'll end up dead. The scene shifts to Saiken's building. The secretary says she was able to trace the protagonist's location, and as he predicted, he went to that dungeon. Saiken asks if he really went after Suzuki, thinking that if it's true, then he's definitely targeting the Messiah's guild, and because of that, Jean would be an incredible ally. All of this only if he makes it back alive, telling the secretary to prepare that, which is in fact the Pharaoh's power. The scene shifts again to the dungeon. Jean, alongside Suzuki, continues fighting. Suzuki says it's just the 2 of them now, asking if he's finally out of tricks. Jean thinks that even using multiple skills, Suzuki is far stronger than he remembered, assuming he was overconfident for thinking he could take him on. Suzuki says he's the first person who ever forced him to fight this hard, and because of that, he acknowledges him. And if it weren't for that ring, he would have been dead a long time ago, just like his subordinates. Suzuki thinks he already knows it, but if he loses any more blood, he'll end up dead. So he charges at the protagonist to land the finishing blow. A flashback appears with Park saying that since his blood is poisonous, if he were ever seriously injured, it wouldn't be easy to perform a blood transfusion. That's why he could become useless once he gets even stronger, but until then, he should at least save his own once. Right after, the secretary hands over a skill page. The scene returns to the present with Jean remembering the page he had received. At that moment, the protagonist charges at Suzuki, apparently activating a skill. A light begins to surround Suzuki's body, and after that, the 2 fall to the ground. The system announces that he suffered excessive bleeding and that all of his stats would drastically drop. Jean, meanwhile, had recovered some of his HP, and his bleeding had stopped. The boy says Suzuki should have known his true nature by now, asking why he still follows that bastard. Suzuki asks if that's the reason he dared attack, mentioning that everyone says the world is going insane, but that's far from the truth. For the players who rule the world, that's justice, and finishing the game is nothing but foolishness. Then the protagonist takes Suzuki's ring, saying that since he was stronger, he should accept his fate and die by his hand. Then the boy uses the Nimbus I skill. Time passes again, and the dungeon has finally been opened. Jean, meanwhile, is watching something, and an unknown man appears, saying he was waiting for him and that he should take the radio. It's revealed to be Chan, saying he couldn't believe he really killed Suzuki, and Jean asks if there's a problem with killing a fake hunting dog from Messiah. But Chan says there's no problem, he just didn't think it would cause so much trouble. At first, he thought Jean was just an eccentric client, but either way he got the message loud and clear, mentioning that they're interested in what he plans to do. So he wants to meet again to talk business, and since it's important, they should discuss it face to face. After that, Jean accepts the offer, saying there's no reason to refuse because if those business deals are about eliminating Messiah, he's all in. The scene shifts to another location. The secretary, meanwhile, seems to be in a room with several lockers. Right after she opens one, looking at a photo from her past, she seems moved by it, but still returns to where she was headed. The scene changes again to a forest on fire. A man thinks that's the signal to retreat, and for that reason everyone should leave. The forest keeps burning, and all the players start to flee. However, one of them remains behind. It's revealed to be Jinnah, thinking that the protagonist wanted him to grab that fire thing and wondering if he lost his mind. Jean asks if he doesn't trust himself and if he's afraid of getting burned, but Jinnah replies that it's not that. He was just wondering if the plan is even possible. Jean asked him to hold out for 5 seconds so that he can't move because he'll take care of the rest. Also, he should grab that item, Lancelot's ring, because he should hold on to it just in case Jinnah asks if he's proposing or something. But the boy tells him to stop saying stupid things, mentioning that the ring protects the user from all impurities, even if it doesn't help with burns, and if the Firefox's flames can cause any negative effects, that ring will save his life. Back to the present, the boy thinks that the protagonist promised to buy a ton of food if he could hold out against the Firefox for more than 5 seconds, and for that reason he's going to make him regret that decision. He begins charging toward the Firefox. Right after, the boy grabs it. The wolf in turn starts to roar, activating its fire ability. It hits Jinnah directly, but he thinks he'll endure it no matter what, and afterward, he'll eat until the protagonist's wallet is empty. Our hero, meanwhile, is watching the situation from a distance. After that, he pulls a weapon from his inventory. He begins advancing toward the flames. Jinnah continues to hold the monster, which keeps on roaring. The scene shifts to another place, with news that the Japanese government gave permission for the Messiah Guild to join the dungeon raid. Sechin thinks that for Messiah to have secured the national treasure from an Arank dungeon, it means they probably know a weakness in the Japanese government. Since Isaac's appearance, the Messiah Guild began operating much more aggressively, and it's totally possible they got their hands not just in Japan. Right after that, the secretary appears on the scene, but Sechin seems to notice something. Her high heels apparently were full of dirt. The girl says she'll deliver the report about that thing he requested the other day, so we should give her just a moment. But Sechin says there's no need to rush, since they're not even during business hours. Grabbing a calendar, he thinks he hadn't realized how fast time was flying, and she probably went to that place today, and since it's her birthday, she should at least buy herself a gift. Asking if maybe they should have meet for lunch that day, the secretary, surprised, asks if Sechin is going to pay, and if he got some kind of coupon. The scene changes again. The protagonist, together with Jinnah, had already left the dungeon. Jinnah thinks he hadn't expected the Firefox's flames to have those kinds of effects. Even so, Jinnah thought of everything and came prepared. He thought he had gotten a bit closer to him, but in reality he still has a long way to go. The protagonist starts to walk away, but Jinnah asks why he's splitting off, and if he's not going to fulfill the promise before leaving. Because he said that if he held the Firefox for more than 5 seconds, he'd buy all the food he wanted. The guy says that's true, but in fact, he only managed to hold the monster for exactly 9 seconds. Hearing that, Jinnah gets frustrated, asking if he's going to cheat on the food bet. The two then start arguing and the protagonist begins walking away. The scene changes again. Park thinks that Isaac Ivanov is truly an impressive guy, because at first he thought he was just an idiot. Jean, sitting at the table with Park, says he thought the same thing. Next, his secretary appears saying she has something to report. But since he's with a guest, she'll say it later. However, Park says it's fine, she can speak now. And his secretary says that Joan, whom they were trying to recruit, ended up joining the guild. It seems she beat them to it due to Johan's growing influence in Europe. In the middle of it all, Jean is surprised, thinking that Suzuki accelerated the chain of events, and now Hell need to observe the situation and adjust his plans accordingly. Park says he wanted to use Johan to keep the Messiah Guild under pressure. But now he's become a threat with no other choice, they'll have to come up with a plan B. Jean then gives an idea, asking what he thinks of that Isaac Ivanov guy he just mentioned. Park says it would be great if they could get him to join their group, but they have no information on that person. The secretary says that according to rumors, Isaac has been making appearances on the black market to buy skilled pages for his skeleton knight. Hearing this, Park goes silent, then says things might be easier than he thought. The next scene goes to the Messiah Guild building. A girl approaching Lee says that Suzuki has been killed. Also, all of his subordinates were defeated. As for the Kaesong workshop, it was demolished without leaving a trace. Observing the situation, Lee asks who was the person who decided to provoke them like that. The girl says it could be one of Park's men, since one was seen in Kaesong using a fake identity, so she believes their forces made the first move. Lee asks how she's going to respond to this situation, and the girl says that if he's talking about Park Yonghwan, she already did something. It's going to happen very soon. Because his foolishness in trying to keep his Messiah Guild under threats will be what brings about his end. Not only that, there's another problem. They ended up hiring a certain person to keep Isaac under control. He's a player who has been showing his ambitions by expanding his forces all over Europe. His Nimbus is the emissary of the underworld, and his main skill is the skeleton soldier. Apparently, he's capable of countless skeleton soldiers that can slaughter armies, and no matter how powerful the enemy is, it's still useless against his army. Players who witnessed his overwhelming power call him the king of the undead. His name is Johann Jorg. They decided that instead of the mysterious Isaac, it would be easier to deal with Johann Jorg, who doesn't hide his ambitions. Even though Isaac told the media that he had a friendly relationship with the guild, they still suffered major losses because of that man. Right after, Lee approaches the girl, saying that she's right because the greater someone's desire, the easier they are to manipulate. Besides that, he liked the title King of the Undead. Not only that, but Hell give the girl one last chance. And then Lee leaves the room. The scene cuts to Park Yeonwan, who is getting into a car. The secretary asks what's wrong and whether the negotiations with the Frontier Guild didn't go well, but Park says everything went smoothly. He mentions that those guys have been wanting to enter the Korean market for a long time, but their pride wouldn't let them bow to the. His secretary says that cooperating with one of the 5 largest companies in the country would be great for them in terms of keeping Messiah in check, and asks if something's bothering him, and Park says yes, because nothing in this world is free. Thinking that people who approach him with too much goodwill are surely plotting something, and if the Frontier Guild is planning to stab him in the back, Hell makes sure to use their own weapon against them. He orders them to call the protagonist to the guild headquarters the next morning. Time passes again. Jim asks if he only needs to work with the Frontier Guild for now, but Park says they want work with them. They'd only need their protection and then level up safely. They say they'll enter a dungeon in 2 days, so Jim must make sure he's ready. Time passes again. Jim thinks that to maintain the Messiah Guild, Park had no choice but to ask for help. But that's obvious because there's no way Park's Shinhide didn't anticipate his plans. Judging by the situation, it's very likely that the Frontier and Messiah Guilds are secretly working together behind the scenes. However, it's never good to rely on assumptions, and that's why he needs more information. Time passes once again. One guy says he's really excited to meet the Frontier Guild, and another says going on a dungeon raid with their support was amazing, because he's happy to have joined Park Yong-jae's elite squad. Right after, someone opens the door. The man says his name is Kim and he was part of the legal team at the Frontier Guild, and if he could sit down he wanted to explain a few things. Then the man explains everything, saying the Frontier Guild is doing everything they can to ensure their safety. Therefore, everyone must comply with their restrictions, because from now on they're forbidden from entering any dungeon without being accompanied by the guild. Not only that, but inside the dungeons they are not to do anything at all. Another guy, confused, asks what he means by that. Kim says he thinks they misunderstood the contract because it only states they'll help them level up safely, so there's no clause in the contract about honoring their freedom, and if they don't accept the restrictions, it'll be problematic for both parties. That's why they should just sit down because he's going to make it very easy to understand. Saying once again, don't even think about doing anything inside the dungeon. Just let the guild power level you like little kids. If they have any complaints, they should make them now, because Hell makes sure to notify Park Young-won personally about the termination of the contract for refusing to cooperate. Leaving the room, Kim says Hell assume everyone understood, and that they'll enter the dungeon in 30 minutes observing the situation. Jim wonders if they plan to control Park Young-won's men in the name of supervision. Right after, the protagonist receives a call and the person says they believe a major change is necessary. It probably wouldn't be a good idea to enter that dungeon, and after doing some digging, they found out that the Messiah and Frontier guilds are working together. Seikan had thought the Messiah guild's recent actions seemed odd, but he had no idea they had joined forces with one of the biggest guilds in the US. Ask him why he won't give up on that dungeon since he could find one much safer, and the protagonist says he thought he was underestimating it too much because you'd have to enter the lion's den if you want to hunt one. If he weren't reckless, the two of them wouldn't even be talking, and he doesn't think now is the best time for a conversation now that they know both guilds are working together. Seikan says that's true because they need a new plan as soon as possible. Jim says there are two things he wants to ask for. First, to keep the information about those Frontier guys updated, and second, to handle the fallout. Hearing that, Seikan agrees, saying that since he made his decision, he should do what his heart tells him because Hell makes sure to clean up the entire mess. The scene shifts to a dungeon. The system announces that they have leveled up. One guy's surprise asks if he leveled up again, and the man replies yes because he leveled up twice, saying that this is the third dungeon but he still can't get used to just sitting around doing nothing. His companion says it's not bad since they're getting paid just to sit still. And the other guy says he heard rumors that Park is preparing to raid the 64. They haven't announced it yet, but word is they're starting to recruit elite members. Hearing that, Jim thinks it seems like the Frontier Guild is rushing through the dungeons to make things easier for Park Young-won. Time passes again and the players continue to level up exhausted. One guy asks if it's finally over. But Githerman says he doesn't remember telling them to stand up, asking why they started moving on their own. The guy asks what he means by that since a dungeon completion message popped up wondering if it's not actually over. The man says Hell say it again, there's nothing they can do inside a dungeon without his orders. Meanwhile, the protagonist was silently listening to everything. The scene shifts again to another PlayStation, says that Jean must be hating not doing anything, but those guys won't dare try anything stupid because of how closely Park is watching. Though that might not last, Park Young-won must be getting impatient, because he held a press conference much earlier than expected. Jean says it was critical for him to reveal his intentions as quickly as possible, so it's not like he had much choice. Station says that the moment Park enters the dungeon the Frontier guys will show their true claws, and he's sure Jean will handle it the best way possible. Jean asks about the intel he requested and Sichan tells him not to worry because it'll be in his hands by the next day. Time passes again and the scene moves to another location. Our hero remains silent, then says he thought Sichan was going to be the one there that day. It's revealed that the secretary was there, saying it's been a long time since she last saw the protagonist. A flashback appears with Sichan saying that he needed to meet with Jean in person at least once. Watching, the secretary asks if he has something to say and he replies that she could attend the meeting the next day because this is important for her too. Back to the present. The girl apologizes because something important came up for her boss at the last minute. Then she pulls something out of her bag saying the business plan will proceed without any problems. Jean begins analyzing the documents, surprised by what he sees, because not only does it have information on the main members of the Messiah Guild, it also includes detailed outlines of the guild they're affiliated with. The secretary says that according to the information they summarized, they managed to infiltrate not only the Frontier Guild, but also all 5 of the world's top guilds. First, they need to eliminate those who are working with the Messiah Guild. Jean asks if she's suggesting they start by trimming the branches. The secretary says that's exactly it, because that's the only way to get a glimpse of hope. And as for the previously mentioned payment, that should be more than enough. Looking at the document, the protagonist is surprised. The girl says the information in that file is incredibly valuable because it includes a list of items used by the Messiah Guild. Seeing all of it, the protagonist is shocked, saying this is more than enough as payment. He then starts flipping through more of the pages, finding information about a man named Oliver. Jean thinks that's the guy who was guiding him in the previous dungeon, but he never imagined he'd be owner of such a rare spear. Right after, he asks the secretary to send a message to Satan, because he needs to get the same person who guided him last time. The scene shifts to another location. The other guy asks why he was just standing there doing nothing. Oliver says that today they only need to kill one person, and it doesn't matter whether they kill or spare the other four, because they need to focus on that one individual. The other guy says he thought he was worried again because there was too much work to do. Oliver says he heard the other teams have to deal with 4 to 7 people, and he thought he was lucky too, until Chief Naomi called him. A flashback shows the man saying that since Park Young-kwan is absent due to entering a dungeon, he should begin that day. Asking if he's been taking care of his spear because Jean is a top priority on the elimination list after surviving multiple assassination attempts from other guilds. Also, that spear wasn't given to him just because it's amazing. Amid the situation, Oliver thinks he has to succeed no matter what, and after everything he's been through, he can't let them take his spear away. Time passes again, and the group finally enters the dungeon. The objective was to survive for 4 days in order to proceed to the next 4. Oliver thinks it's a survival quest, and if that senses something's wrong and starts running, they might have to chase him for 4 whole days. And if he makes it to the second floor, things will get really complicated. Observing the situation, Jean thinks they plan to make the first move on the first floor. For that reason, it's his time to start acting too. Then a man approaches Oliver, asking when they'll begin. Oliver says they'll finish it quickly by isolating him and then getting rid of him, pretending it was a minor accident. At that moment, the group starts hearing an argument. Realizing it's the protagonist himself who's causing it, without wasting time, Oliver orders everyone to grab the boy. And looking to the side, he orders the other players to do the same. Another man watching this situation wonders if that Kim guy had gone crazy or something. Even if it's a bit overwhelming, there's no better situation than this one. The scene cuts to the players chasing the protagonist. One of the men wonders where he went. His companion asks if they should split up to find him, since he's probably not too far from there. But the guy says that if they split up carelessly, they'll end up in danger, so they should return to base. It would be better to talk with Oliver. Meanwhile, someone is watching the argue. It's revealed to be the protagonist, and without wasting time, he jumps down from a tree. Right after, he pulls an item from his inventory, saying that he was never able to test it before because the security was too strict, but he finally got the opportunity, thinking that the spoils of war he got from Manga Dungeon and the Fire Dungeon were very interesting. Not only that, but he also has the Ultra Ring Gem. Activating his skills, thinks that he can finally summon a new type of skeleton soldier. So the video ends here. If you don't want to miss the next part, activate the notification bell, and see you next time on Tob's channel.